kill you? What would I do without you?
The top 100 Batman villain backstories explored. This eccentric rogues gallery boasts of a cavalcade of renowned supervillains. Spearheaded by Batman, names like the Joker, Harley Quinn, the Riddler or Penguin and many more will come tumbling out of our bag of oddities. Each villain has a unique and individual style, motivation, sinisterness and most importantly, an enticing origin story.
My name is not Oswald! It's Penguin! I am not a human being!
Heroes in comics often have sad backstories, but the villains seem to have it really bad. Childhood abuse, bullying, poverty, insanity, and a string of unfortunate events seem to plague their lives, which finally causes them to reach their breaking point and turn criminal. At times, we cannot help but empathize with them. In this list, we are going to talk about the origin stories of several iconic Batman villains. Before diving into the content, we would like to make a very small request to our viewers. Please subscribe to Marvelous Videos, like and comment on our videos, and press the bell icon to be notified whenever we upload a new one. We would be very grateful to you, and we hope to bring you the best of nerdy content. So, without further ado, let's get right into the video. Number 1. The Joker. The Joker is one of the most important supervillains in pop culture and an arch-enemy of Batman. There is no definitive backstory of this devious mastermind, which only adds to his ambiguity and deviousness. However, his past, as revealed in Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, tends to be the most popular one. The Joker was originally an engineer who worked at a chemical plant. He dreamt of being a stand-up comedian, and so he quit his job to pursue his dream. But he failed miserably. His wife Jeannie was pregnant, and he did not have the funds to support a family. So he agreed to help two criminals break into the chemical plant where he worked. However, during the planning session of this break-in, where he was considered to be the leader, the police contacted him and told him about his wife and unborn child dying in a household accident. He is consumed by grief and tries to back out, but the criminals force him to go on with the plan. But when they break in, a fatal shootout ensues because the security had been alerted, and the criminals are killed. Batman confronts the Joker, who is terrified and leaps over a rail. He falls into a chemical vat which bleaches his skin chalk white, turns his hair emerald green, and gives him ruby red lips. When he looks at his own reflection, the revolution adds more pain than the trauma of losing his family, triggering a severe shift in his personality that drives him insane. And thus, the Joker is born.
Too seriously. Do you want my opinion?
Number 2. Scarecrow. Scarecrow, or Dr. Jonathan Crane, is an obsessive professor who previously taught psychology. He does not seek wealth or power as a criminal. To him, only research matters, to study humans better. His life as a criminal in the golden age of comics is triggered after he is fired from his job. He was an expert in the psychology of fear, and to illustrate his teachings better, he had fired a gun in the classroom, and this indiscretion resulted in him getting fired. He is then ostracized by his peers, who went on to mock his behavior and appearance, causing him to turn to crime for a relatively better social life. He took on the persona of the Scarecrow, with which he used to threaten his victims into doing his bidding. During the Crisis reboot, his origin story was expanded. A nerdy boy with a lanky frame, Crane was bullied in his childhood and adolescence when everyone called him a Scarecrow. This instigated desires such as revenge and fear in him, causing him to commit his first murder during his prom while donning a ghoulish Scarecrow outfit. It is later that he becomes a psychology professor at Gotham University, where he is fired for accidentally injuring a student. He turned to a life of crime and is later transferred to Arkham Asylum as a psychiatrist. There, he begins to perform fear-induced tests on his patients under the moniker Scarecrow.
I don't know what's gonna happen to you either.
Number 3. TwoFace. Harvey Dent was a district attorney in Gotham City who was a strong ally of Batman, but everything changed after a certain traumatizing incident. Dent was born and bred in Gotham. His father was an alcoholic who was regularly physically abusive. He would often use a double-headed coin flip trick to give Dent a chance to escape. But of course, that never worked due to the nature of the coin. This traumatic childhood caused Dent to develop severe mental issues such as schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. However, after becoming a lawyer, he stood for the position of district attorney to dedicate himself to a life of justice. For a while, he held up to that ideal until a mobster named Sal Maroni threw acid at Dent. This scarred half his face, causing him to go insane. He then adopted a criminal life where he struggled with his duality as Harvey Dent and the criminal TwoFace. He is noted for using a coin flip for every decision he makes, without which he cannot even make up his mind on basic issues.
Who the hell are you?
Just a friend. But you can call me the Riddler.
Number 4. The Riddler. The Riddler is an enemy of Batman, known for his obsession with puzzles and riddles. He acquires great joy from keeping the police force of Gotham on their toes as they try to decode the complex clues left by him. Originally known as Edward Nashton, he was raised in Waterbury. His habit of seeking answers to anything that popped into his mind caused the adults to often get annoyed with him. One day, he heard about a brain teaser contest from his teacher, where he had to assemble a puzzle in the shortest time period. Edward volunteered to participate as he wanted to not only win the contest, but also gain popularity. He would practice solving the puzzle until he could do it in a record time of 15 seconds, which made him get the first prize. And he won a book of riddles and puzzles, which was the beginning of a lifelong fascination. But he also received a lot of negative attention from bullies. Time went by and Edward became a part of the working class. He loathed this lifestyle and called it being in hell. So he turned to crime for profit and entertainment. Soon he realized that he was not satisfied with simply committing a crime and needed to create hype for himself. He then came to be known as the Riddler. Number 5. Mr. Freeze. Victor Freeze was an accomplished cryogeneticist, but it all went south for him after his beloved wife Nora fell victim to a fatal degenerative disease. Freeze grew up with no friends and had a violent father. He was super talented as a scientist and also married Nora, the love of his life. So her contracting a rare disease made him spiral downwards. To save her life, he started working under the evil corporate Ferris Boyle. When Freeze realized that Norris was beyond help, he decided to place her in a cryostasis. To do this, he stole equipment from the company. Ferris learns about the theft and sends his goons to kill Freeze in the cryolab. However, this results in an accident which causes Freeze's body to change. He can now only survive in sub-zero temperatures. Freeze builds himself a cryosuit powered by diamonds and arms himself with an ice gun. This is how his journey as Mr. Freeze begins.
Oh, your buddy!
Number 6. Bane. Bane is a supervillain and an assassin who is also an escaped convict from a South American prison. He is known for the abnormal physical strength he gained after being subjected to experiments that involved a derivative of the venom drug. Bane was born to serve a life sentence due to his father's crimes, and as a result was born and bred within the prison. He murdered for the first time during his adolescence and went on to become feared and respected in the prison he grew up in. He honed himself mentally, intellectually, and physically to reach his peak form. While Bane was king in his prison, he learnt about another king from Bird, an inmate from Gotham City. This king was Batman. At the same time, the warden of the prison nominated Bane to be a subject of an experiment that would create a super soldier by using the drug venom. Bane volunteered for it and was presumed dead. His body was tossed into the sea, where he freed himself. He returned to the prison, held the warden hostage, and escaped using a chopper. He then travelled to Gotham with Bird and 2 other allies, hoping to dethrone the other king, Batman.
Call me Penguin. A flightless bird, but one with style.
Number 7. Penguin. A gentleman of crime, Penguin is one of Batman's oldest foes. He is known for his elaborate scheming that takes place behind the curtains, while he maintains the image of a club owner in public. Penguin, or Oswald Cobblepot, is from an aristocratic family, but he had a terrible childhood. He was born as a very ugly child, as a result of which no one except his mother loved him. His father hated him, and his brothers left no stone unturned to treat him with disgust. The other kids compared him to birds due to his nose, and they would tie him to monkey bars, and he panicked mid-air, making him look like a penguin. They would also raid his aviary and crack the bird eggs, while Oswald watched helplessly. All these experiences created the desire for revenge within Oswald, and he grew more and more resentful towards a society that treated him like an outcast for the way he looked. Later, when his father and brothers passed away, he inherited the wealth of the Cobblepots. After his graduation, he started Iceberg Lounge, a socialite club where he would conduct his illegal activities as a boxing promoter and criminal on the down low. Number 8. Raj AlGhul. Raj AlGhul founded the League of Assassins, a league which aspired to create a new world order by purging corruption. To do so, they were ready to kill anyone. He was born 700 years ago in one of the Arabian deserts. He grew up with a tribe of nomads. During his early stages of life, he was fascinated with science. However, he could not pursue his studies because of his tribe, and so he left his community and relocated to a city. He became a physician and got married to Sora. Later, he discovered the Lazarus Pit, which happened to be a secret lair. He once tried to save a prince while being oblivious to his sadism. He put the prince in the Lazarus Pit, but when he re-emerged, the prince was driven completely insane by the pit and strangled and killed the love of Rash's life, Sora. The Sultan declared Rash to be guilty as he could not admit to his son's fault, and sentenced him to a slow death by being locked in a cage with Sora's corpse. However, an elderly woman frees Rash, who then seeks out the tribe that brought him up. He convinces the head of the tribe to follow him in his quest for revenge against the Sultan. He manages to kill both the prince and the Sultan, and then gets his tribe to raze the entire city down and kill its citizens. Finally, he wears the title of Raj AlGhul. Number 9. Deathstroke. Deathstroke, originally known as Slade Wilson, is the most dangerous assassin in the world. When he was only 16, Wilson wanted to enlist in the US Army. He ran away from his house and lied about his age to enlist. He proved himself to be talented with special skills in guerrilla warfare, causing him to climb the ranks quite fast. Slade mastered several styles of combat and became the lieutenant colonel. He also began a romantic relationship with Captain Adeline and had a son named Grant Wilson. After his birth, the army asked Slade to volunteer for a secret medical experiment, a defense against the truth serum. However, this experiment was actually an attempt to create meta-human soldiers. The experiment was unkind to Slade's body, causing him to become aggravated and aggressive. He had to remain sedated often. Later, he realized how the experiment had enhanced his physical abilities beyond the ordinary. He then dedicated himself to hunting to satisfy his urges as a combatant. After his lifelong friend, who was sent on a suicide mission, was captured, Slade went unauthorized on a solo mission to save his friend. By doing so, he had disobeyed the orders of his superiors, which caused him to get discharged after he saved his friend. By this time, he was fed up with the army's code of conduct and blind loyalty, and had created his persona of Deathstroke, the Terminator. He soon became the world's greatest mercenary. Number 10. Killer Croc. Killer Croc is an alligator wrestler who was originally known as Waylon Jones. He became a monster in Gotham City, and he dwelled in the sewers. In the DCEU Suicide Squad film, Amanda Waller described him with the phrase, "Evolution took a backseat with this one."
What the hell is that?
His name is Waylon Jones. Evolution took a step backwards with this one.
Jones was born with a condition where he had a thickly scaled hide instead of skin. He also had super sharp teeth. This caused him to get bullied relentlessly as he resembled a monster, causing him to snap and almost kill a bully when he was only 8. He then spent the next 8 years of his life at reform school, and he began to resent humanity more and more. At the same time, his appearance also became more and more reptilian. He celebrated his 18th birthday by becoming a cold-blooded murderer. He was captured and served a sentence for 20 years. After his release, he joined a traveling carnival and became a popular attraction as an alligator wrestler known as Killer Croc. The circus became his family, and he had finally found a home and acceptance as who he really was. But after the circus failed for poor financial reasons, Jones moved to Gotham to create a criminal empire. He eliminated other mob members and rose to the top of the city's underworld.
Guess they're gonna need a new name. Oh, why hasn't Batman wiped this little smear off the face of the planet?
Number 11. Black Mask. Roman Sionis was a former business executive and a mafia boss. Unlike the other villains in this list, he hates Bruce Wayne and not Batman. Sionis hails from a wealthy family. His parents only cared for one thing, their social status, and did not pay much heed to the well-being of their son, who was dropped by the doctor immediately after his birth. He was always forced to attend to and befriend the children of other wealthy families, such as young Bruce Wayne. However, his parents hated the Waynes behind their public social masks. Sionis hated the fake persona his parents emulated in public. In the future, his parents died in a suspicious fire accident, causing Sionis to inherit Janus Cosmetics Corporation. However, his lack of experience caused him to drive the company to the ground, causing Wayne Industries to buy it. He was enraged by the loss of his family's legacy and directed his hatred towards Bruce Wayne. Sionis carved a mask from his father's coffin and donned it, while he murdered the Wayne employees. During a battle with Batman, his mask burned into his face, making it a permanent death mask. He went on to become a ruthless and sadistic crime lord as he commanded a masked army called the False Faces. With time, he kept losing to Batman, while his sadism grew and empire shrank. Number 12. Clayface. 8 DC villains from the comics have had the alias Clayface. In the comics, he was Basil Carlo, a B-list actor. He had previously starred in a horror movie called The Terror. When he learned about not being a part of the remake of the movie, he was driven insane. He went on a subsequent killing spree as he killed the crew members and the cast, while he sported the mask that was worn by the villain of the movie, Clayface. He appeared in the animated universe as Matt Hagen, an actor past his prime whose face is disfigured in a terrible car accident. While he was recovering in the burn clinic, the corrupt businessman Ronald Duggett approached him and made him a test subject for a chemical compound called Renew You. He promised it would restore Hagen's youthful appearance, but in exchange, he would have to impersonate people for Duggett's illegal operations. Hagen conflictingly agreed and gradually got addicted to Renew You. He impersonated Bruce Wayne to get the documents from Lucius Fox, but was stopped by Batman. Later, Hagen tried to steal Renew You from Duggett, but Duggett's henchmen busted him and tried to kill him. They poured an entire canister of the chemical on Hagen's face. The overdose saturated all of his cells and turned him into a disfigured lump of clay who could shapeshift for short periods of time. He then tried to get his revenge as Clayface. Number 13. Deadshot or Floyd Lawton is a mercenary like Deathstroke and is highly reputed for being a lethal assassin and one of the greatest marksmen ever. Born to a rich couple, Lawton was the younger son. He lived in the shadow of his elder brother Edward and he idolized him. However, his father was abusive. During his teens, his mother convinced him to kill his father and he climbed a tree to get the perfect shot. But he missed and ended up killing his beloved brother. He promised himself 2 things that night. He will kill his father the next chance he gets, and he will never miss a shot again in his life. Lawton trained as a sharpshooter and joined the Marines as an adult. He spent some time with Rash's League of Assassins before becoming an independent hitman. He also had a daughter who was kidnapped by the agents of Cobra to get to work for them. Deadshot sought out Batman, who decided to help him, but with the clause that they could not kill anyone during the rescue mission. However, Deadshot killed a man who threatened his daughter's life, and Batman arrested him. He was then sent to Belle Reve, after which he was invited to be a part of the Suicide Squad.
Protect me, children, as I've protected you.
Number 14. Dollmaker. Barton Mathis is a devious serial killer who works alongside his so-called family and operates outside Gotham City. He calls himself the Dollmaker. He is the 3rd incarnation of this villainous alias. The first alias was Marcel Mannequin, the plastic man villain who would use his sentient robot dolls for criminal activities. Barton Mathis went on many hunting trips with his father during his childhood. These hunting trips were far from your regular hunting trips, and Mathis would observe his father kill people and then cannibalize them. He also witnessed a young cop named James Gordon shooting his father down, which resulted in his landing up in foster care. He spent 1 year there and disappeared for years to come. When he resurfaced, he had become a criminal called the Dollmaker. He wore a mask which was partially made from the skin of his deceased father.
Hi, boys.
Number 15. Harley Quinn. Harley Quinn, originally known as Dr. Harleen Frances Quinzel, is another massively popular supervillain, often appearing alongside the notorious Joker, serving as his female sidekick with an equally twisted sense of humor. Her origin story in the comics revolved around growing up with a harsh mother who would constantly call Harley evil. Her father was a criminal conman who would swindle women out of their money. Her brother was a deadbeat who had children with different women, lived in his mother's house, and squandered all the money Harley had sent him to get his life back on track. To understand why her family was the way it was, Harley studied psychology. However, she found it to be dull and tricked her way into college. She theorized that being in love was similar to being a criminal because a person in love could do anything for their beloved. She used her boyfriend Guy as a test subject, and she pretended to commit crimes for him, such as murdering a professor. When he saw the professor again, Guy shot him, thinking that Harley had failed in killing him. Unable to live with the guilt, he asks Harley to kill him, as he could not bring himself to commit suicide. Harley disguises the murder as a suicide and is subsequently traumatized. She grows a cynical outlook towards life and represses her feelings of sorrow. So when she meets the Joker, they connect as he has the same philosophies as Guy. Harley finds a job in Arkham Asylum so that she can speak with the Joker. She shows him her insanity, which he finds appealing. She gradually grows obsessed with him and helps him escape several times. She eventually becomes his sidekick. However, she remained oblivious to his lack of affection for her and allowed herself to be used by him.
Sayonara, chumps.
Number 16. The Ventriloquist. Arnold Wesker, the original ventriloquist. Having had a timid demeanor since childhood, the untimely deaths of Arnold's parents would push the emotionally fragile boy into the depths of existential turmoil. Overcome with grief, Arnold began suppressing his emotions to cope with this loss, until one night he couldn't anymore and bludgeoned a man to death during a bar fight. Now, stuck in Blackgate prison with his grip on sanity rapidly unraveling, Arnold began believing that his cellmate Donegan's carved ventriloquism doll Woody was alive. And together they managed to escape the prison after hanging Donegan from the same noose that was meant for Arnold. After escaping to Gotham City, the meek Arnold Wesker and the now disfigured Scarface come together to become the supervillain, the Ventriloquist, debuting in Detective Comics number 583, written by Alan Grant. Wesker quickly rises through the criminal world, becoming a powerful enough mob boss to pull strings from the Ventriloquist Club, landing on the radar of the world's greatest detective. The man and voodoo puppet connection has no superpowers besides their eerie resistance to telepathy, thanks to their shared consciousness. Regardless, they've become one of the most persistent thorns in Batman's side and have been featured in several prominent storylines like The War of Jokes and Riddles, City of Crime, and Jim Aparo and Doug Mench's critically acclaimed Nightfall. Number 17. Dr. Phosphorus, or Light. Nuclear power seems to be the easiest method for obtaining superpowers. From totemic spider bites to accidental molecular restructuring, we've seen a whole host of superheroes and villains rise up due to radioactivity, but perhaps none of them have experienced the Chernobyl-like trauma of the atomic experience, quite like Dr. Phosphorus. Created by arguably one of the most important contributors to Batman lore, Steve Englehart, Dr. Phosphorus debuted in Detective Comics number 469. Dr. Alex Sartorius was a member of the Tobacconists Club, a clandestine group of affluent figures who wanted to build a nuclear plant in Gotham City with the help of the club's chairman, Rupert Thorne. After being rejected by the citizens of Gotham, the club decided to build the facility at sea. However, as you might have guessed already, building a radioactive facility in a water body is a fundamentally flawed idea, and when it eventually tore itself apart, Sartorius found himself struck near a reactor core about to blow up. He hoped that the sandbags he ducked behind would shield him, but alas, every burning kernel infused itself into his body and transformed the overzealous scientist into the vengeful Dr. Phosphorus. Being pure phosphorus energy, he could manipulate radiation and fire to his will, and was nearly indestructible in battle. He first attacked Gotham City by poisoning its water supply with radiation, then proceeding to exposing concertgoers to nuclear emissions by trapping them in the location. Batman was put firmly on the back foot during this encounter and had to bust out a radiation-resistant suit to get the job done. He's been a nuisance for Batman ever since, making his way in and out of Arkham while managing to give radiation burns to other DC heroes like Starman. In the Batman Beyond animated TV series, Dr. Phosphorus is reimagined as Derek Powers, aka Blight, who possesses much of the same abilities as Dr. Phosphorus, except he glows green instead of a more traditional flaming hue. Number 18. Spellbinder. How magically enchanting is pop art? Apparently strong enough to fool Batman twice, and that itself is no mean feat. Conceived as the personification of the alluring effects pop art has on spectators, the Spellbinder debuted in Detective Comics number 358 and was created by John Broome and Sheldon Moldoff. Delbert Billings was a con artist skilled enough to create counterfeit pop art exhibits and swindle wealthy art patrons out of their money. He decided to put his talents to better use, creating a vast array of oral and visual technology to hypnotize his opponents by inducing illusions. Donning his garish orange and yellow costume, which would have likely given Andy Warhol a serious heart attack, the Spellbinder sets out to rob Gotham City dry with his hypnotic techniques and his army of henchmen. The first time he crossed paths with the Caped Crusader, he was able to get away by tricking Batman into thinking he was somewhere else entirely, allowing Spellbinder and his minions to escape unscathed. He then used a series of projections and body gestures to send Gotham's protector into a trance-like state on their second encounter. It was only after Bruce subjected his highly organized mind to rigorous anti-hallucination training that he was able to defeat Spellbinder. Billings fled to Metropolis after this for a while, where he was able to get toe-to-toe with the Man of Steel thanks to a customized turntable whose sonic blasts were powerful enough to fatally assault the Kryptonian's senses. Subsequent iterations of the character have developed psionic and mystical powers that greatly augment their ability to mentally torment their victims, with the best one by far being Batman Beyond's Gara-esque version that was Ira Billings' Spellbinder. Number 19. Owlman. Imagine if Batman himself used all his genius and wealth to commit crime instead of fighting it. He'd turn into the very predator that hunts down the creature that inspired the bat signal. That's exactly the idea that Gardner Fox and Mike Sekowsky had when they created the Owlman for the Earth 3 continuity, DC's role reversal universe where the villains are heroes and the Justice League is the crime syndicate of America instead. In a later retcon, he was established as Thomas Wayne Jr. from the Antimatter universe, the elder brother of Bruce Wayne. In this version, Bruce and Martha are killed by the Mugger. Thomas Sr. becomes the police commissioner, and Thomas Jr. becomes Joe Chill's criminal apprentice. Taking on the moniker of the Owlman, he commits crimes for the sheer rush of it, and even abuses a drug that gives him enhanced intellect and a rudimentary form of telepathy, strong enough to give him control over comparatively feebler minds. Owlman still serves as the brains of the organization, but in this version, his feud with Ultraman is more overt, and he is having an affair with Superwoman, this universe's version of Lois Lane, who is also Ultraman's wife. Barring the reboot retcons, of which there are a lot more, Owlman has crossed paths with Batman on a number of occasions, most notably during the original CSA vs. JLA storyline, and more recently during the events of Forever Evil. With the latest reboot, yet another Owlman has emerged in the main DC continuity. But this version has something more to do with a certain clandestine court. Number 20. Hush. Within the span of 12 issues, Jeff Loeb and Jim Lee were able to create one of the most iconic Batman villains who wasn't wearing a ridiculous Golden Age costume. For the most part, anyway. Born a child of wealth and privilege, young Tommy Elliot becomes close friends with Bruce Wayne. Bruce's father, Thomas, was happy to see the children bond and felt that Bruce had finally found a friend he could relate to. Tommy and Bruce enjoyed playing games of strategy, with Tommy always seeming to outmaneuver his otherwise brilliant friend. However, while Bruce enjoyed his parents' company, Tommy hated his father, who was drunk and always abusive. His mother, who had originally come from a background of poverty, did next to nothing to help her son, as she was willing to endure every abuse dealt to her and her son so that she could keep her lavish lifestyle. It didn't help that Tommy was constantly reminded of the happiness that the Wayne family had, as juxtaposed with his own abused existence. Blaming the society, his parents, and most importantly Bruce for all his misfortunes, Thomas decided to claim his inheritance with blood and killed his parents for it. He then dedicated his entire life to destroying Batman, whose secret identity was known to him as the bandaged psychopath Hush. He teamed up with the Riddler and put in motion a series of events that would have seen Batman finally kill the Joker and disgrace himself. When that didn't work out, he beat Riddler within an inch of his life. Hush would go on to perform plastic surgery on himself and pose as Bruce Wayne, seeking to take away the finances that facilitated Bruce's nocturnal activities. He was able to raid many of Bruce's overseas accounts, steal Selina Kyle's heart, infiltrate the Batcave, and gravely injure Alfred before the Bat family's interjections turned the tide in their favor. Despite having no superpowers beyond his surgical skills and his intellect, the psychological impact of Hush's actions isn't something Bruce is going to forget anytime soon. Number 21. Poison Ivy. Selina Kyle was Batman's first official female villain, but given her on-again, off-again relationship with the Caped Crusader, it's really Poison Ivy who's the first woman to sweep Batman off his feet, and not in a good way. Her origins have changed over the years, but two things remain constant: botany and betrayal. In her Silver Age origins, Pamela Lillian Isley was an attractive and talented botanist who lived in Seattle. She was seduced by Mark Legrand, a criminal who needed her to assist him in stealing an Egyptian artifact with an ancient herb inside it. Legrand poisoned Isley with the herb to tie up all loose ends. Fortunately, she survived and became immune to all manner of toxins and diseases. She realized that she was completely unaffected by certain plant-based hypnotic toxins that she could use to control others, and adopt the guise of the villainous seductress Poison Ivy. Using her hypnotic powers, Poison Ivy almost made Batman fall for her during their first encounter. She managed to make Bruce become so infatuated with her that he had to be bailed out by his willpower in the middle of a fight when he'd randomly start daydreaming about her. Eventually, he was able to break out of his trance-like state and turn her over to the authorities. After Crisis on Infinite Earths, her backstory was altered. In this version, she was given her powers by the Floronic Man's experiments. This version of Poison Ivy retained all her original powers and gained a plant-like appearance, the ability to grow plant life, mutate people into plant hybrids, and kill people with a poisonous kiss, a power that would come to define her very character. In recent years, she has become somewhat of a vigilante herself, protecting the Green alongside the Swamp Thing and going on to adventures with her best friend or girlfriend Harley Quinn and the Suicide Squad. Still, she'll always be remembered as the woman who almost stole Batman's heart, and again, not in a good way.
And what better way to get rid of a rat than by drowning it?
Number 22. Solomon Grundy. You know, say what you will about this guy, at least we are happy TwoFace found a friend. Cyrus Gold was born sometime around the early 19th century. In the year 1895, he had carried out an affair with a local prostitute from Gotham City named Rachel AlGhul. According to AlGhul, she was pregnant with Ghul's child and she sought to extort money from him for her silence. Cyrus met her for a secret negotiation at Slaughter Swamp, several miles outside Gotham. When Ghul refused to yield to blackmail, Rachel's pimp, Jem, dashed Cyrus across the back of the head with a shovel. They buried Ghul in the swamp, content that no one would ever come looking for him. Over the span of 50 years, Ghul's body interacted with the detritus and sour vegetation of the swamp that caused his corpse to transform into a rotting, vegetative, undead monstrosity that didn't remember anything about its past life except that it was born on a Monday. Using this association, he began terrorizing DC's cities as the zombified entity that the world would soon come to know as Solomon Grundy. Over the years, he has appeared as an adversary for a plethora of DC's superheroes with vastly varied capabilities. He's lost his powers, come back to life as a human being, and been reimagined as an avatar of the Grey in accordance with the Swamp Thing's pantheon. In the Earth 1 continuity, Grundy was powerful enough to rattle Superman. During the events of the Long Halloween, where he befriends his bipolar BFF, Grundy was defeated by Batman with comparative ease. He would reappear on the Cape Crusaders' radar when he hunts down one of the descendants of Cyrus Ghul's killers, being beaten by the Dark Knight yet again whilst cementing his place amongst the Cape Crusaders' rogues gallery.
Docile, friendly.
Appetite?
Low, but I'm not concerned.
I'm curious.
Number 23, Hugo Strange. First appeared in Detective Comics number 36 and created by Bob Kane and Bill Finger, Professor Hugo Strange is Batman's oldest adversary and one of his most dangerous foes. According to Commissioner James Gordon, in the post-crisis continuity, Strange was abandoned as a child, grew up in state homes, a bright kid, but he apparently had a temper. Nobody knows how he put himself through college and medical school. Golden Age Bruce Wayne acknowledged the enigmatic menace, saying, Professor Hugo Strange, the most dangerous man in the world, scientist, philosopher, and a criminal genius. Little is known of him, yet this man is undoubtedly the greatest organizer of crime in the world. He holds the distinction of being one of the only villains to survive Batman's early, trigger-happy shenanigans, being sent to jail for committing large-scale robberies in Gotham City. In the Golden Age, he was positioned as the Jim Moriarty to Batman's Sherlock Holmes, with the pair even recreating the iconic Reichenbach Falls climax on the pages of Detective Comics. Strange also created flesh-eating monster men during this time, who are about as cute and cuddly as you're imagining them to be right now. He makes his comeback 33 years after taking that Reichenbach fall as a medical specialist in Gotham City who only operates on its elites. It is here that he discovers Batman's identity and tries to ruin his life by posing as the Caped Crusader and committing a string of crimes while Bruce is knocked out of commission. He keeps resurfacing now and then, most notably having been Dr. Death and Fright.
You're mighty in Gotham, Batman, but in Wonderland, the Mad Hatter reigns supreme.
Number 24, The Mad Hatter. We are pretty sure that when Lewis Carroll wrote his children's story, Alice in Wonderland, he didn't imagine the amusingly deranged Mad Hatter as a villainous character. Clearly, Bill Finger and Bob Kane thought differently because they introduced the readers of Detective Comics to his debut in Batman number 49. The Mad Hatter's first appearance wasn't particularly interesting. He decided to rob the rich socialites who were members of Gotham Yacht Club, but was foiled by Batman and was promptly shipped off to Arkham Asylum. It wasn't until 1983's Detective Comics number 526 that he was portrayed with his patented hypnotism-inducing one-of-a-kind hats. He also has two separate origin stories, both of which are downright tragic. His first backstory explained his mind control gimmick. He was an expert in hypnotic suggestions and hypnotherapy, and his skills would be put to lethal use when his neighbor's daughter became pregnant and Jarvis helped her mother teach the boys a lesson. The new 52 reboot expanded on this and explained his obsession with hats. It was because his father was a hatter himself. In this version, he suffered from hypogonadism and had been spurned by a girl called Alice because of his short stature. Determined to win her back, he had practically OD'd on steroids, which drove him insane, completing his transformation into the Mad Hatter. Tetch used his field of expertise and combined it with his obsession to create mind control technology powerful enough to subdue even the great Batman. At one point, he almost succeeded in luring Barbara Gordon to a tea party, and only God knows what would have happened to her if Batman had not arrived in time. As the years progressed, so did his lunacy, and he has managed to become a mainstay in Batman's rogues gallery. Number 25, Victor Zsasz. Victor Zsasz isn't crazy. He has no dysfunctional family background, no childhood abuse or trauma. He just kills because he chooses to. Mr. Zsasz lived a life of privilege. He had a loving, wealthy family and graduated top of his class, later going on to amass a fortune of his own through various companies. At the age of 25, his parents tragically died in a boating accident, and while he accepted what had happened, Zsasz could not help but feel depressed at their loss. In an attempt to distract himself from his growing depression, Zsasz became swept up in high-stakes gambling and ended up losing everything to the Penguin. Dejected, he realized how hollow life is and how robotic human beings have become in their pursuit of it. Before he could commit suicide, he was attacked by a homeless person with a knife, and he saw the same hollowness in his attacker's eyes. Deciding to take out these zombies from the world in order to make it a better place, he kills the man and carves a tally mark on his own flesh, transforming into the vicious serial killer Mr. Zsasz. He debuts during the last Arkham storyline as its focal character and has sneaked up on Batman on several occasions, a feat even Catwoman fails at performing sometimes. Aside from the Joker, Zsasz is probably the only person to really get Bruce when he says they are in fact very similar, and the Dark Knight nearly pummels him to death in a blind rage. Judging by his actions, we'd say that when it comes to this murderous maniac, it's best not to trust what he says, even about himself. Number 26, ManBat. When will comic book scientists realize that rushing to human trials is almost always a bad idea? Kirk Langstrom was a brilliant geneticist who specialized in extracting and isolating traits from one species and transferring them to another. However, his borderline obsession with the field made him the butt of jokes for the entire scientific community and his wife Francine. Kirk was hoping to use the enhanced hearing of bats to overcome his encroaching deafness. He made a breakthrough with his experiments, but was denied further funding due to the glaring risks of the procedure. Overwhelmed with grief and ridicule, he decided to prove his genius by using the formula on himself. At first, it looks like the serum succeeded as his hearing returns and he quickly makes amends with Francine. But Kirk's entire life changes when the volatile formula starts mutating him to a man-bat hybrid. His mind is overcome by murderous instincts, and he is plagued by frequent blackouts, which culminates in the suicide attempt that seals his fate as the ManBat. Debuting in Detective Comics number 400, ManBat's first encounter with Batman takes place while Langstrom is out looking for a cure to his condition. The world's greatest detective is able to deduce the identity of this Chiropteran menace and apprehends him, administering the antidote forcibly. Langstrom would go on to perfect his formula to maintain consciousness while operating as ManBat, which would cause him all sorts of troubles, especially when his formula is turned into a weapon by the League of Assassins. He has since reformed himself, working as an ally of Batman after the Caped Crusader helped in Langstrom's rehabilitation. Number 27, Talia Al Ghul. Many women can claim to have been loved by the great Bruce Wayne, but only one can prove his reciprocation. And would you believe it, it's the woman who wants to desperately kill the man. Raj AlGhul was, shall we say, a prolific lover who had sired many a child in his centuries of existence. Raj met Talia's mother at Woodstock Festival of all places, and soon after, Talia was born. When her mother died a few weeks after her birth, Talia was raised by Raj himself, groomed to become the heir to the League of Assassins. She grew up to become one of the League's strongest assets, a lethal martial artist, assassin, and political maneuverer who could make lesser men dance to the tune of her fingertips. Her loyalty to her father's cause used to be unshakable until she met and fell in love with Batman. When Raj decided that Batman was suitable to become his heir, he staged a test for Bruce by telling him that his daughter and Bruce's ward had both been kidnapped. While Bruce didn't fall for Raj's tricks, he did for Talia, even though they always found themselves on the opposite sides of the battleground. Talia has even assisted Bruce on multiple occasions, most notably during the crime spree instigated by Hush, by giving him valuable information and also helping take Lex Luthor down after he becomes the President of the United States by exposing his criminal activities and transferring his assets to the Wayne Foundation. She even helped Jason Todd recuperate after his resurrection and funded his vigilantism on the condition he leaves Batman alone. Alas, Batman's caution proved to be with good reason, as Talia turned on her beloved and her own son to take control of the League after Rash's death. She goes on to create the international terrorist network Leviathan, and even put a $500 million bounty on Damian's head. Her relationship with her son and her paramour are tenuous at best these days, and despite having been Bruce's baby's mama, Talia Al Ghul isn't above using that fact to play psychological games with the world's greatest detective. Intervention. Number 29. Philo Zayas. Mob enfacers are dangerous as it is, but a mob enfacer with reflexes and eyesight so enhanced that he could go toe-to-toe with Gotham's protector? Now that's something we don't see every day. Following the death of his parents in Sicily, a young Philo Zayas went to live with his uncle, Victor, who worked as a gardener for a Sicilian mafia boss. When his uncle, too, passed away, Zayas was taken in by the mafia and given a purpose in life, being groomed to become a top-tier mafia enforcer. Feeling a sense of indebtedness to the mob for giving him a life after he thought he'd lost everything, Philo agreed to undergo an experimental surgery on his optic nerves that would increase his perception and reflexes to superhuman levels. A pair of high-tech goggles, which are wired directly to his frontal lobe, allow him to record and analyze the movements and tactics of his enemies in great detail. Using these enhancements, Zayas can anticipate or emulate those tactics, and this, combined with his extensive martial arts training, makes him one of the deadliest hand-to-hand combatants on Earth. He came to Gotham City as the personal bodyguard of Lew Moxon and quickly developed a crushing vendetta against Batman, battling the Caped Crusader to a stalemate. He has since relocated to Gotham's east side and finds himself continually bumping up against Catwoman. Number 30. The Firefly. The original Firefly was Garfield Linz, who was a Hollywood stuntman that turned into the light beam-wielding villain. Thanks to the power of lore building, he has since been characterized as a pyromaniac turned pyrotechnics expert who went insane and turned into the blazing threat that is the modern Firefly. This version of Firefly was the protege of Killer Moth, with the duo attempting to replicate the success of the Dynamic duo, but eventually was abandoned by Firefly when he discovered the full extent of Lin's insanity. The second Firefly only made a one-off appearance during the Silver Age of comics before being properly canonized by the New 52. Ted Carson was a wealthy kleptomaniac who used his position in Gotham's elite circles to stage several robberies as the Firefly. This version is notable for managing to successfully use Kathy Kane, the first Batgirl. With the New 52 reboot, Carson was formally recognized as the second pyromaniac to don the mantle of Firefly, having killed Garfield Linz and taken over his role. Now, thanks to DC's Infinite Frontier event, he has been resurrected and both Fireflies operate together as a flame-throwing duo that has two major purposes: threatening Gotham City and proving once and for all that the Firefly is the superior pyrotechnic villain out of the two that have been encountered by Batman over the years.
You and your gadgets. You're not the only one with tools.
Number 31. Jason Todd. Jason Peter Todd is the second Robin, who stepped into the shoes of being Batman's sidekick after Dick Grayson adopted the moniker of Nightwing. He was raised in the slums of Gotham City. His father, Willis Todd, was a petty criminal. Willis was eventually arrested but never returned home after his release. Jason was left alone with his mother Catherine, who was a drug addict. He was oblivious to her not being his biological mother. He grew up in a neglectful environment and turned to crime for his survival. Catherine died from a drug overdose and Jason was left stealing car parts for money. Batman spotted him while he tried to steal the tires from the Batmobile. He put him in a facility to correct troubled youths, but it turned out to be a front for training youngsters to become criminals. Later, Batman took him under his wing to train him to be the new Robin. During an altercation with the Joker, Jason's Robin ends up dying. When Superboy Prime alters reality, he is resurrected. However, he has sustained his injuries from the past and Talia Al Ghul immerses him in the Lazarus pit to restore him, where Ra's was also immersed. The pit's energies, combined with Rash's, affected Jason's personality, turning him antagonistic. He sought out Batman when he realized that his death was not avenged. On learning that Batman was not remorseful for sparing the Joker's life, even though he had killed Jason, he becomes the Red Hood. As the Red Hood, he was an anti-hero who resembled Batman but was more than willing to cause fatalities in fights.
Shall we go into dinner?
Number 32. Professor Pig. Originally known as Lazzo Valentin, Professor Pig is a twisted surgeon who is one of Batman's disturbing antagonists. In the New Earth continuity, he worked for a secret government agency called Spiral as a chemist. Exposure to a certain neurotoxin that could imitate Alzheimer's disease left him schizophrenic. He became obsessed with the Pygmalion effect and wanted to make people perfect. With a lust for human perfection, he began to kidnap people from Gotham and made them undergo horrific transformations to create Dollotrons. He later became a part of the Circus of Strange alongside metahumans. In the Prime Earth continuity, the organization he worked for, i.e. Spiral, was revealed to be a rogue agency that was led by a neo-Nazi called Dr. Daedalus. He later became allies with Talia Al Ghul through the Leviathan organization. Number 33. Carmine Falcone. Carmine Falcone, nicknamed the Roman, is a powerful mafia boss in Gotham City who dominated the city's organized crime. In the New Earth continuity, the father, Vincent Falcone, was also a mobster. He was shot at a young age and taken to the Wayne Manor, where Alfred and Dr. Thomas Wayne saved his life. He later got married to a woman named Louisa and they went on to have 2 daughters. During this time, the father, Vincent, forced his men to murder Carmine's second-born as he believed the child to be his weakness. Louisa convinced the enforcer to spare her life and sent her up for adoption in Gotham, where she grew up to become Selina Kyle. The Falcone family overtook the Maronis to take control of Gotham City. Vincent passed and Carmine became the new head of the family. Due to his shrewdness, cunning and Italian heritage, Carmine was dubbed the Roman, as he enjoyed the position of being Gotham's most powerful Don. In the New 52 continuity, Carmine became a mob boss in Gotham after driving out the former Don Rex the Lion Calabrese out of Gotham before he became known as the Roman for his cunning. Number 34. Ink. Ink is a Batman villain originally created for Batman Beyond, the animated series. She can shapeshift into a featureless black liquid form that resembles ink. There's a lot of ambiguity revolving around her early life and origin story. For example, we never find out the reason why she was turned into a metahuman or how she gave birth to her daughter. What we do know is that she was born to extreme poverty. As a result, she was aware of how necessary money was and went on to become obsessed with acquiring it. Eventually, she had to turn to a life of crime to make money. She had a daughter known as Diana Clay. The father's identity was not disclosed, but due to her criminal background, Ink was on the police's radar and as a result, she had to be on the run. So she left Diana with unnamed guardians who would care for her. She then subjected herself to an experiment to become a biogenic mutant, as that experiment would pay her a hefty amount of money. With the new metahuman form, she went on to become a high-ranking assassin and a corporate saboteur who would charge a heavy fee. She became Interpol's most wanted criminal soon enough.
One of my own.
This was your second warning. There won't be a third.
Number 35. Prometheus. Prometheus is a dark reflection of Batman, the yin to his yang. Batman lost his parents to criminals and learned to fight as he wished to protect Gotham City by eradicating crime. Meanwhile, the story of Prometheus is quite the opposite. Due to his poor experience with the law, he sought to destroy it. and so he trained himself in the ways of murder. He was born to two very loving hippie criminals. They would travel all over the United States and commit indiscriminate murders and often thefts. The murders often became brutal, which would catch the attention of the law. They were eventually cornered by the police. However, they forced the police to kill them in front of their son. The trauma from this incident caused Prometheus's hair to go white in shock, and he swore to destroy law and justice. He got his hands on large amounts of money thanks to the hidden stashes of his parents. He also extorted local mob bosses with whatever knowledge he had. With this money, he travelled all over the world to learn the ways of murder and sharpened his skills to make him an efficient criminal against the system he sought revenge from.
You're dead.
Not anymore.
Number 36. Azrael. The title or name of Azrael is given to the champions of an amoral and extremist faction of the Catholics under the Order of Saint Dumont. Azrael is both an ally and an enemy to Batman. Jean-Paul Vallée was the first Azrael to appear in the comics. He was a bottle baby. His father, who was the Azrael before him, genetically engineered him with the DNA of an animal. From a tender age, he was psychologically conditioned to become his father's successor. After his father's death, he was sent to Europe to train under the Order of Saint-Dumont. The second Azrael was Michael Washington Lane, an ex-cop who was experimented on by an evil scientist called Dr. Hurt. He subsequently gained enhanced strength and reflexes, but the treatment drove him berserk. Initially, he was supposed to be a part of the police force, but his psychologically altered state caused him to side with the Order of Purity, which is a splinter group that referred to their champion as Azrael. The third Azrael in the story is Abraham Arlington, who preceded Michael Lane as the Azrael in the Order of Purity. He was trained by the Order of Saint-Dumont in Europe, just like Jean-Paul, and made to don the suit of sorrows. However, he turned insane within 6 weeks of wearing the suit and was placed in a mental hospital. Number 37. Dr. Death. Dr. Karl Helfern, or Dr. Death, is the first ever supervillain who Batman went against, making him a crucial addition to Batman's gallery of rogues. During the Golden Age, or the post-crisis continuity, we don't learn much about Dr. Death's origin story. What we do know is that he creates lethal poisons to aid his plans to get money from the rich people of Gotham. He also manufactures bioweapons and sells them on the black market to terrorists. However, in the New 52 continuity, we see Helfern as a scientist for Wayne Enterprises. He is shown to have a knack for military advancements as he was from a family who worked as soldiers. He had a son who was deployed in the Middle East. Lucius Fox hired Helfern as a scientist who would lead the bio-initiative that studied regenerative healing. He focused on the study of bone growth while his peers studied cell regeneration and neurology. During this time, Helfern learns about his son dying overseas. He is fired soon after due to the frequent failures of his experiments. He had initially drowned himself in work after losing his son, but after losing his job as well, he had begun to believe that there was no justice in this world. As a result, he strikes a deal with Edward Nygma, who allows him to continue his experiments as a criminal scientist. He eventually finds a chemical that can accelerate bone growth and mutate people horrifically. He was the first traditional supervillain and a recurring adversary of Batman. Number 38. Killer Moth. Killer Moth is a supervillain who seems to be overly inspired by Batman, which also makes him an antagonist to both Batman and Batgirl. Instead of helping people, he helps lawbreakers as their Dark Knight. Not only does he copy his building and paraphernalia, but also takes on the alter ego of a rich philanthropist named Cameron Van Clear. Killer Moth was initially a petty criminal and an ex-convict. He had a dream. He wanted to become a patron saint for the criminals of the city and protect them from the police and the law by giving them their own costumed supervillain. However, he was motivated by greed and not justice, and as a result, he did everything for a price. He would help criminals escape the law in exchange for their illegally acquired wealth. Number 39. Arkham Knight. Astrid Arkham donned the moniker of Arkham Knight. She founded a cult called the Order of the Sun, which was dedicated towards the destruction of Batman. Her parents, Dr. Jeremiah Arkham and Dr. Ingrid Carlson, were psychiatrists who worked at the Arkham Asylum. Ingrid was a kind woman who was respected by the inmates of the asylum, even among the likes of Harley Quinn and the Joker. When Ingrid was pregnant, there was a riot by the inmates. During this time, she went into labor. Poison Ivy, Harley Quinn, Clayface, TwoFace, Solomon Grundy and the Joker protected Ingrid and helped her deliver Astrid. However, a stray batarang hit her and it slashed her neck. Astrid was isolated from society while growing up, so she spent her time and formative years with the inmates of Arkham Asylum. Instead of befriending kids, she befriended criminals who often served as a parental figure to her. Because of this relationship, she began to hate Batman, as he was the one responsible for their incarceration. She began to see a demon in him, a demon who hurt people. She would often read out fairy tales with knights to the Joker, and this went on regularly because she really had a thing for the knight archetype. As she became obsessed with destroying Batman, she started to undergo harsh training to be a skilled fighter. She also learned how to masterfully wield a sword and adopted the Arkham Knight as her alliance.
Or perhaps he doesn't know you're here. Perhaps.
Number 40. Calendar Man. Originally known as Julian Gregory Day, Calendar Man is a criminal who commits crimes that correspond with significant dates such as holidays. However, he is a petty criminal and his ridiculous crimes have made him a joke in front of both the law and crime. When he was a child, his father would always promise to be home during the holidays. Julian waited for his father at the bus stop from Christmas Eve to New Year's until he was taken in by the police. He then began to assign literal meanings to the dates and would suffer from mood swings depending on what day it was. Mother's Day turned out to be another nail to the coffin, as the mother was far from being the ideal maternal figure. She turned down the love Julian showed for her, causing him to succumb to uncontrollable rage. He attacked her mercilessly, and when he regained his senses, he found himself holding his mother's bloodied heart. He found his father living in the East End docks on Father's Day. They would go fishing together, where he dismembers his father's body and uses it as fish bait. Anytime Julian would taste a great serving of fish, it made him feel closer, a tad closer, to his otherwise absent father. His mind grew more and more twisted with age, and he crashed a family's Thanksgiving dinner. He then killed everyone, enjoying some of the meal and assigning a feeling of loneliness to the dates, as he had no family to spend it with. It was also on this day that he was captured by Batman. Number 41. Killer Frost. Killer Frost is a metahuman with cryogenic powers. She is also a recurring member of the Suicide Squad. Crystal Frost was the first Killer Frost. She had studied cryogenetics in the Arctic, during which she was locked in a cryogenic chamber. This turned her into a metahuman with cryogenic powers. She hated men and sought vengeance against Martin Stein, her former professor and crush, for rejecting her. She became his nemesis after learning that he was one half of Firestorm, a nuclear superhero. Crystal died from an overexposure to the nuclear superhero, which caused her best friend, Dr. Louise Lincoln, to adopt the same method used by Crystal to gain the superpowers. She wanted to avenge her late best friend and as a result became the new Killer Frost, who was dedicated to killing Firestorm. In the new 52 continuity, we meet Caitlin Snow, the most popular Killer Frost. Snow was originally a genius who worked at STAR Labs. She was posted to the Arctic for research purposes and learnt about the work of Dr. Louise Lincoln, aka her frosty predecessor. She was extremely inspired by her work that revolved around subverting the second law of thermodynamics. She referenced her work to create a self-sustaining thermodynamics engine when her colleagues were revealed to be the workers of a villainous group called HIVE. They placed Caitlin in the engine in an attempt to silence her, as they were responsible for Lincoln's death and wanted to keep the engine a secret. Caitlin panicked and ripped out the wires for the coolant system in the engine, which altered her biological makeup and infused it with ice. She then turned into Killer Frost and killed the Hive agents.
I'm the better swordswoman.
Number 42. Lady Shiva. Lady Shiva is easily one of DC's most lethal assassins. She was also a trainee under Tim Drake, the third Robin. Her daughter, Cassandra Cain, became Batgirl in the future. As an assassin, she specialized in bare-handed skills. Originally known as Sandra Wusan, she was the granddaughter of O Sensei, an expert in martial arts. Her sister was killed, and she was told by a mysterious man that it was the doing of Richard Dragon. Sandra began to undergo rigorous training to avenge her sister and realized that she had a natural aptitude for the martial arts. After years of training, she was ready to go against her opponent and take revenge for her sister. She adopted Shiva as her code name and hunted down Richard Dragon. She lured him to a trap to kill him, but learned that he never killed his sister, and that the mysterious man was someone who worked for Richard Dragon and wanted him dead. He also told her that the real killer was already dead, as Dragon had killed him during a battle. Shiva began to think that her life's purpose was lost and her training was a waste. So she decided to ally with Dragon and fight during his missions, putting her skills to good use.
Luigi Moroni sends his regards.
Number 43. Salvatore Maroni. Salvatore Sal Maroni was a mob boss based in Gotham City. He headed the notorious Maroni crime family, which was a rising criminal organization. It rivaled the older and more established criminal family of the Falcones, the one headed by Carmine Falcone. As a Don, Sal Maroni was feared considerably. However, his influence and power was second to that of the Falcones in the beginning of the series, which he resented. He also resented Carmine Falcone and considered him to be a weak, fragile, and useless human being. He wished to outdo them and gain a stranglehold over Gotham's crime. He is also the guy responsible for burning Harvey Dent's face with sulfuric acid after losing a case.
This game just got interesting.
Number 44. Anarchy. Lonnie Machen, or Anarchy, is a child prodigy who has a laser focus dedicated towards overthrowing the government and improving the social conditions for living. The character revolved around the philosophies of anarchism, and it attacks crony capitalism, corruption, and economic inequality. His mother, Greta Mitchell, was a showgirl who had given him up when he was a baby boy. He was adopted by Roxanne and Mike Machen, who recognized his special inquisitive and curious mind at an early age. He would visit bookstores with Mike, where he found an immense interest in every subject, and in particular, philosophy. The knowledge caused him to be angry with the corruption prevalent in politics and corporations. He also hated the elites and would take to the streets in a costume, calling himself Anarchy when he was only 12. He assaulted CEOs and celebrities and left his mark with spray paint as he drew the symbol of anarchy. He was captured by Batman and incarcerated at the Gotham Juvenile Corrections Hall. Here, he hacked computers as the Money Spider and transferred millions from wealthy capitalist corporations to third-world countries. He later amassed a small fortune and created a special device that enhanced his intelligence to high levels. He also adopted a smooth style of fighting by integrating the study of martial arts to his mind. Number 45. Blockbuster. Similar to Azrael, Blockbuster is an alias that can be used by many. Here, it is used as a supervillain alias held by brothers Mark and Roland Desmond. Mark Desmond, or Blockbuster 1, was a chemist who used himself as a subject for his experiments. Using a super steroid, he got bigger and stronger, but he also turned mindless. His criminal-minded brother, Roland, cared for him and shielded him from their mother, who was oblivious to Mark's monstrous appearance. Roland went on to use Mark to commit crimes. In the New 52 continuity, Mark was a patient of Dr. Fane. He underwent intelligence-enhancing procedures, during which he was exposed to a green compound via Ivy. An accident caused Desmond to experience an overdose of the compound. It gave him super strength and turned him into Blockbuster. He later joined the Secret Society. Following Mark's death, Roland became the Blockbuster after being treated with experimental steroids. He also became an overpowered, mindless behemoth, but Neron elevated Roland's intellect to genius level. Roland then created a criminal empire as he planned to dominate the underworld of Gotham. In the New 52 continuity, Lex Luthor controls a Blockbuster that resembles Mark Desmond. Later, this mantle was adopted by a female metahuman criminal. Number 46. Jeremiah Arkham. Jeremiah Arkham initially appeared in Batman Shadow of the Bat's first story arc, The Last Arkham, where he had his longest and most significant appearance. Jeremiah is presented in this series as the ruthless superintendent of Arkham Asylum, who has fantasies that the criminals he holds will one day be able to live in societies. Jeremiah appears as a supporting character in several Batman films, always believing that the Arkham inmates could be rehabilitated. This would change in Batman Life After Death, when it was revealed that Jeremiah was the Black Mask, and that he had been utilizing the inmates to construct his criminal empire. His alter ego, Black Mask, was a violent Gotham mafia lord, and the commander of the False Face Society, who was notorious for his hatred of Bruce Wayne and his aptitude for torturing his victims. Batman apprehended him and imprisoned him in his own institution. When Jeremiah took over Arkham Asylum from his uncle, he demolished it before rebuilding it with cutting-edge technology to keep Arkham's criminals like the Joker, the Scarecrow, and Cornelius Stirk imprisoned. He was a gifted administrator who had an uncanny ability to read people's minds.
Look, the tiger appreciates your concern, Batman.
Number 47, Catman. Thomas Blake was a world-famous jungle cat trapper who turned to crime after becoming bored with hunting and losing much of his riches. He assumed the identity of Catman, a burglar who committed his crimes while dressed in the catsuit made from an antique African material that he believed gave him a cat's 9 lives. Catman originally appeared in Detective Comics 311. Catman's experience as a game hunter and in the outdoors combined to make him an extraordinary tracker. He can follow and detect odors even without metahuman senses. Catman is a skilled fighter, capable of taking on Batman and Bronze Tiger, 2 of the DC Universe's best combatants. He prefers to use bladed weapons, such as knives, or these unique blades that he wields like claws. Catman became a laughingstock in the supervillain community after years of loss at the hands of Batman and Catwoman. So he retired and traveled to Africa to live among a pride of lions. Blake became a criminal mercenary and a member of the Secret Six after the lions were slain. First, to pursue down the Lion's killers. Blake continued with the Secret Six when the Lion killers were identified.
I won't go down easy. Sure you will.
Number 48, Copperhead. Copperhead made his debut appearance in Gotham City dressed as a snake. Before being arrested by Batman and the first Batgirl, he committed countless thefts. Copperhead subsequently resorted to more lethal pursuits as a super assassin, smothering victims with the tail of his outfit. He would become obsessed with his target during this period and think about nothing else until the target was dead. Copperhead was largely impotent without his snakeskin suit, despite being a superb contortionist. Copperhead's contortionist abilities enabled him to fit into extremely tight areas. As we said before, he was originally dressed like a snake. The suit was made up of a weave of metallic and elastic fibers, with Kevlar protecting the vulnerable places, making it bulletproof and impervious to practically any cutting-edged weapon. Copperhead was later converted into a human-snake hybrid after selling his soul to the demon Neron. He was given venomous fangs, a forked tongue, claws, and a prehensile tail, as well as improved reflexes and agility. Manhunter later killed him, and he was buried in the Hall of Justice morgue. Number 49, KG Beast. Anatoly Knyazov was a brilliant assassin who worked for the Soviet Union's secret police and intelligence agency, the KGB. Anatoly Knyazov, codenamed the Beast and dubbed the KG Beast by the CIA, was trained as an assassin by the Hammer, the KGB's top-secret cell. His strength was cybernetically augmented, and he was claimed to have mastered the use of every lethal weapon known to man, in addition to being a master of several martial arts. He was also said to have slain at least 200 people when he initially appeared, including maybe Anwar al-Sadat. In the 10 Nights of the Beast tale, the Beast makes his first appearance. The Hammer's general, enraged that the Soviet government is working to improve relations with the US, dispatches Knyazov on an unauthorized mission to assassinate 10 high-ranking US officials, 10 key figures involved in the US Strategic Defense Initiative dubbed Star Wars, in the hopes of putting an end to it. He managed to kill 7 of them before fleeing. He's baffled Batman on several occasions, losing multiple limbs and organs in the process, including one of his eyes and one of his arms, as he has always been vanquished. Number 50. The Calculator. Bob Rozakis and Mike Grell were the original creators of The Calculator. Brad Meltzer later transformed him from a masked thief to a villainous information broker. The Calculator began his criminal career by traveling around the country and fighting a variety of superheroes. He'd then push a button on his special suit, which would evaluate and record their fighting techniques. He wouldn't be defeated by any of the same heroes again. His suit was equipped with a powerful computer capable of analyzing and predicting an opponent's fighting tactics. The helmet's projector may materialize solid objects from an unknown energy source. The Atom, Black Canary, Green Arrow, the Elongated Man, Batman, and Airwave all battled him and vanquished him. He was sentenced to 9 consecutive life sentences in jail. The Calculator broke free from prison and chose to start over. He then became an oracle for supervillains after hearing about how a buddy overheard Black Canary talking to herself after a battle and hearing stories about Oracle. He began to obtain jobs for people as a result of his friendships with various villains, and he rapidly built up a wide network of knowledge and contacts. Number 51. Tweedledee. Tweedledee is one half of the villainous duo Tweedledee and Tweedledum, played by Diva Tweed. They are violent gangsters and supervillains who look to be Batman's adversaries. Diva Tweed and his cousin Dumfrey are so similar that they may be mistaken for identical twins. They are otherwise known as Tweedledum and Tweedledee because they resemble Sir John Tenniel's portrayals of those characters in Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. The Tweeds are usually in cahoots with one another when it comes to illicit activity. They prefer to plan criminal plots and delegate any necessary physical activity to their henchmen, who are fat and lethargic. The Tweeds frequently use their striking resemblance to one another to fool their opponents to believing there is only one of them. They teamed up and modeled themselves after the books Tweedledee and Tweedledum, often devising crazy, absurdist plots to catch Batman. When Tweedledee and Tweedledum were committing a string of crimes in Gotham City, they came across Batman and Robin. The Tweeds were caught by Batman and Robin, who went on to vanquish them on several occasions. Number 52. Dr. Hurt. Dr. Hurt, also known as Simon Hurt, was first introduced in 1963's Robin Dies at Dawn story by Bill Finger and Sheldon Moldoff as a minor one-off character. Grant Morrison was in charge of the character's modern reimagining, and he had a penchant for bringing obscure individuals from Batman's prior chronology into his multi-year Batman epic, which began in 2006's Batman and Son. Dr. Hurt is a Batman villain and Thomas Wayne's immortal ancestor of the same name. Thomas Wayne was born into the wealthy Wayne family in the early or mid-18th century. Thomas was a devil worshipper who sought to summon the bat god Barbatos and was instead challenged by the Hyper Adapter. After the new god was mortally shot by Batman, Darkseid unleashed the Hyper Adapter, a cosmic creature. When Thomas Wayne called the Hyper Adapter, the being's Omega energies linked with Thomas and made him eternal. In addition, he became inextricably linked to his descendant Bruce Wayne, with the goal of erasing the Hyper legacy. He didn't die of old age and hasn't aged in hundreds of years. Dr. Hurt is also a hypnotherapy and psychiatry expert. His intellect and intelligence are far beyond those of a normal human, having lived for so many years.
Kill you again!
Number 53. The Electrocutioner. Lester Buczynski, sometimes known as the Electrocutioner, is a minor Batman villain. He began as a hero but eventually became a crook and a mercenary. 2 other persons have used his identity, as have many other heroes and villains. The original Electrocutioner was Lester Buczynski's brother, who was killed in war. Lester stepped in to fill the void left by the absence of the mantle. The Electrocutioner, who is overtly reliant on his power to create electricity, has confronted and been beaten by Batman, Robin, and Nightwing. Chuck Dixon created Lester Buczynski in Detective Comics number 644. In Batman number 331, Closed Circuit, his nameless brother made his debut appearance. He eventually honed his villain skills and went on to work for Blockbuster. He was also engaged in Bloodhaven. Lester is capable of electricity manipulation and production, just like the other Electrocutioners. His hands shoot forth varying degrees of blasts. His suit has circuitry that allows him to use a bolt of electricity to stun or kill his victims at will. Number 54. Cluemaster. The Cluemaster is a Gotham criminal who figured out Batman's secret identity in order to get an advantage in combat. However, his strategy backfired and he was defeated by Batman. He was conquered and put back into Blackgate Penitentiary, where he appeared to be rehabilitated but was really only getting rid of his gimmicks. He used to go by the name of Arthur Brown, a failed game show host who turned to a life of crime, leaving behind a trail of clues. Stephanie, his daughter, adopted the surname Spoiler. Following Stephanie's death, vengeance becomes his sole motivation. He became recognized for leaving intricate clues behind in several of his early crimes. This, of course, is never a good idea. Other villains he befriends include Clock King, Big Sir, Multi-Man, and Major Disaster. They join together to form the Injustice League, but they don't survive long in this league before deciding to give up a life of crime. With the help of the Justice League, the 5 of them attempt to reform themselves. They are granted a base of operations in America that is far away from civilization. Number 55. The Great White Shark. Warren White was a vicious banker known as the Great White Shark because of his ferocity. He stole his company's pension fund and practically all of the company's clients' life savings, both working class and upper class. He pled insanity to avoid incarceration, but the judge sentenced him to Arkham Asylum after learning that he had paid off the jury. White went to Arkham believing that, like everything else in his life, he could buy his way out. However, following his discovery, he became the asylum's new fish, despised by both inmates and staff. Even the Joker called him the worst person he'd ever met, while Killer Croc cut slits in White's neck because the new fish needed a set of gills, he reasoned. Warren White is a cunning and shrewd criminal mastermind. He has excellent financial talents which he uses to fund criminal activities, purchase weapons, hire associates, and arrange a variety of other activities. He's proven himself capable of overseeing a criminal empire both inside and outside of Arkham Asylum. He also has a set of razor-sharp teeth that can be used as a lethal weapon if necessary. White was distorted as a result of his injuries and frostbite. His skin turned a pale white, and frostbite took his nose, lips, hair, and several fingers, making him look like a real great white shark and driving him somewhat insane. Many of his fellow convicts later relied on him to act as a connector and a fence because of his business contacts. Number 56. The Court of Owls. The Court of Owls is a centuries-old secret society with great power and influence rooted in Gotham City's architecture and history. The Court of Owls first appeared in Batman number 3, second volume, in 2011, when Batman uncovers their hideaway and various images of them over the years while on the lookout for William Cobb. The court would choose a few trained and strong athletes who had been instructed by Haley's circus to become their talons or assistants. In fact, as we learn later in the Night of Owls storyline, Dick Grayson was slated to be one of their talons, but Bruce adopted him before the calamity could occur. Their existence has been passed down the generations as a nursery rhyme in Gotham City. Beware the coats of owls, they watches all the time, ruling Gotham from a shadow perch behind granite and lime. They watch you at your hearth, they watch you in your bed. Speak not a whispered word of them, or they'll send the Talon for your head. The Talons have managed to stab Bruce numerous times, and despite putting his arm around Talon's neck and applying more than enough power, Bruce was unable to strangle the assassin out. Number 57. The Ratcatcher. Otis Flanagan once worked as a real rat catcher in Gotham City, but he quickly began exploiting his peculiar ability, an affection for and influence over rats, to orchestrate a variety of crimes. His influence over the rodents eventually developed to the point that he threatened Gotham with a veritable army of rodents. Flanagan had an epiphany while incarcerated. He realized he had spent so much time eradicating the city's rodent population that he had forgotten to notice what was truly afflicting it. Gotham's residents were the real infection, and despite his services to the city, Gotham turned against him. This was the origin of the villain, the Ratcatcher. The Ratcatcher, who had been incarcerated numerous times at Blackgate Prison, can inflict as much damage from behind bars as he can from outside, using his devoted, well-trained pets to convey messages and transfer goods inside the massive prison's network of ventilation ducts. Ratcatcher has the ability to converse with and control rats. He also knows a lot about Gotham's sewer system and the layout of Blackgate Jail. In comparison to human life, the Ratcatcher significantly prized mouse life. Number 58. Dr. Death. Dr. Death was Batman's very first adversary back in the golden age of comic books. He is frequently portrayed as a disfigured, mad scientist who creates a variety of biological weapons. Dr. Death's origins are unknown, save for the fact that his real name is Carl Helfern and that he decided to use his genius for bad means at some time. Dr. Death first appeared in Gardner Fox's third Batman storyline, which was written by Bob Kane and illustrated by Bob Kane, making him older than Robin. Throughout the series, though, his character has been reinterpreted in multiple ways. Dr. Death makes his debut appearance in Detective Comics number 29, where he creates a dangerous chemical agent out of pollen extract and devises a scheme to use the poison to extort money from wealthy inhabitants of Gotham City. In all appearances, he is aided by a henchman who does the groundwork for him, while he is the scientific genius who works in his laboratory, creating all kinds of weird and dangerous gases that are lethal when swallowed by humans. His crazy schemes are constantly thwarted by none other than Batman himself, by hook or by crook. Number 59, The Key. The Key is a superhero who originally debuted in Justice League of America number 41. Gardner Fox and Mike Sekowsky collaborated on his creation. He is a brilliant scientist who has created a wide range of future weapons, the most of which are shaped like keys, keyholes, and locks. The Key worked for Intergang as a chemist. The Key was able to come up with indescribably sophisticated crimes that were not usually understood by most people after utilizing his mind-expanding drugs to access into sections of the brain that are normally underused. He found himself up against the likes of the JLA with his squad of followers, the Keymen. He began with heightened 10 senses compared to regular people's 5, as well as access to 90% of his brain power. He also has a blaster in the shape of a key and multiple Keyman robots. He created a dream flu virus that causes hallucinations and transfers energy from victims to the Key. A cybernetic implant also allows him to develop telepathy. In the DC universe, there have been 2 men who have dubbed themselves the Key. The first was a villain who battled Batman, while the second is a well-known Justice League of America foe. The Key was the boss of a major crime syndicate with international field agents. He is thought to have died after jumping from a cable vehicle into a gorge. Number 60, Phantasm. Andrea Beaumont, the daughter of a wealthy Gotham businessman and Bruce Wayne's lover, becomes the meticulous Phantasm, a grim reaper for anyone connected in organized crime in Gotham City. After her father was killed in a hit ordered by the mob, she would assume his identity and use it to hunt down and kill the ones who were responsible for his death. Phantasm, like other DCAU characters such as Harley Quinn and Lockup, was eventually incorporated into DC Comics. She initially debuted in Tom King's Batman Catwoman comic series in Prime Earth. Andrea had practiced martial arts since she was a teenager, but her outfit gave her the majority of her powers. She donned a protective bodysuit that provided some impact protection, as well as a blade on one hand and a smoke-emitting gauntlet on the other. She also worked as a hired spy and assassin, but because of her ties with Bruce, she was unable to accept tasks that she knew would harm him or violate his values. As a result of this, she once declined a hit on Batman himself, putting her own life in jeopardy. Number 61, Amygdala. Amygdala is a constant Arkham Asylum inmate who lacks an amygdala, resulting in monstrous wrath and superhuman power. Aaron Heltzinger was having his homicidal rages removed, but the doctor doing the procedure didn't recognize the difference between the amygdala and the hypothalamus. His rages were even more intense after his amygdala was removed. Amygdala has a childlike disposition and is frequently used by villains, but he is on medication for his condition, which allows him to remain quiet and tranquil. When Batman and Amygdala first meet, he was being manipulated by Jeremiah Arkham, but despite his size, Batman was able to defeat him. He was another one of Bane's convicts who was possessed by the ventriloquist, but Batman was able to defeat Amygdala once more. Amygdala has near superhuman strength, endurance, and injury resistance. He has a few flaws, such as mental issues, and he can't manage his fury. Thus, he's prone to becoming enraged and destroying everything. Amygdala also has an issue with his cognition, since he has the mental capacity of a small child and has a short fuse. Number 62, Flamingo. Flamingo is a DC Comics villain who is a member of the Circus of Strange. Grant Morrison is said to have envisioned him as a version of Evil Zorro, a famous figure with strong ties to the Batman mythos. Eduardo Flamingo was a regular guy with a family who used to be involved in a criminal gang known as The Mob. It lasted until he was apprehended and indoctrinated into a serial killer who eats the victims' faces. He murdered his entire family before becoming a contract killer with an impeccable kill record. In Grant Morrison's Batman and Robin, he is most notably known for nearly killing Red Hood, otherwise known as Jason Todd. He is a very talented assassin, as seen by his ability to single-handedly defeat Red Hood and Scarlet in combat before Batman and Robin arrived. He used a wide range of weapons, including chain whips and submachine guns. He also owns a number of cars, the most popular of which being a bright pink motorcycle, thus being one of the most flamboyant serial killers in the DC universe. Number 63, Bat-Zaro. Wayne Bruce is a warped clone of Batman, perhaps manufactured in the same way as Bizarro, Superman's unsuccessful clone, was. Bat-Zaro appears to be attempting to assist Batman at times, but his jumbled words and odd behaviors make it difficult to be certain. This is the world's worst detective, according to Bat-Zaro. In fact, Bat-Zaro introduced himself to Bizarro as Bat-Zaro, the world's worst detective, in his debut appearance in Superman and Batman. In the polar opposite of Batman's origin narrative, he is depicted with dual handguns, shooting down couples walking down Crime Alley. From Bizarro World, he is Batman's polar opposite. When the Joker gained Mr. Mick Z Spitlick powers, he may have created Bat-Zaro. In many ways, he is the polar antithesis of Batman. Bat-Zaro, in stark contrast to the original, kills his own parents and speaks out publicly instead of quietly contemplating his actions. He also has an inverted bat emblem, no eyes, yellow fangs, a futility belt instead of a utility belt that he wears upside down with the pockets open, and speaks in a Bizarro-like manner. In Superman Batman number 24, Bat-Zaro appears to have died when he jumped in front of a bullet fired by the Joker to save his idol's life. The Joker confesses that he invented Bat-Zaro so that he might have the pleasure of killing a Batman. Before this time, Batman had no idea that Bat-Zaro existed. Bizarro was last seen putting him in the Phantom Zone in an attempt to heal him. Number 64, Lockup. Lockup is a villain from DC Comics and a foe of Batman's. In Robin, number 24, he was integrated into the mainstream comics timeline before the more well-known Harley Quinn. In Robin, number 24, Lockup makes his debut appearance, capturing Charaxis. He then appeared in Detective Comics number 694, where he was shown capturing the minor villain Weedwhacker. He only appeared briefly in both of these adventures at the conclusion, removing the villain before Batman and Robin could return to the scene. His first full appearance was in Detective Comics number 697 to 699, in which he captured TwoFace and transported him to his own prison, where he was joined by Charaxis, Weedwhacker, and a gang of thugs. He is a ruthless vigilante who captures and imprisons offenders for life without trial or mercy, even if he has to break them out of jail first. He also knows a lot about incarceration methods and procedures and can be considered an expert for all practical purposes. He was also voiced by Bruce Weitz in an episode of Batman the Animated Series, where he featured in one episode.
Highest whale! Can you find them in time?
Number 65, Humpty Dumpty. Humphrey Dumpler, as fate would have it, has had a series of almost supernaturally poor luck for the most of his life. Dumpler is a huge man with an egg-shaped head, who is obsessed with speaking in rhyme and disassembling and reassembling malfunctioning machinery in the hopes of restoring it. His illegal acts were thus not evil in nature, but rather mistaken attempts to comprehend and repair the world that has treated him so badly. Despite this, his activities result in a number of disasters, including the derailment of a train due to his sloppy reassembly. In an attempt to heal his violent grandmother, he also murdered and dissected her, then stitched her back together with bootlaces. He was imprisoned in Arkham Asylum not because he was a cruel or evil guy, but because his constant messing with machinery puts those around him at risk. He doesn't have any of the typical cruel or nasty features associated with Batman enemies. He was a model prisoner in Arkham, frequently assisting with minor repairs around the asylum. Number 66. Tom Trigger. Tom Trigger was one half of the Trigger twins duo alongside his brother Tad. Even though they were twins, Tom and Tad were separated at birth. They lived life while being unaware of the existence of the other twin. As luck would have it, both turned to a life of crime. During a particular bank robbery in New Jersey, Tom and Tad were robbing the same bank. During that time, they saw each other's faces and were surprised by the similarity. They then teamed up and finished the robbery as a duo. Eventually, they paired up for their endeavors as criminals and worked for a local numbers runner, where they would kill the enemies of the man. Number 67. Sensei. Sensei Han-son is an expert martial artist. Sensei translates to teacher in Japanese, so he also teaches martial arts such as karate. He has trained only one student to his optimum potential, and that is Ben Turner, aka the Bronze Tiger, who he used for evil. He was affiliated with Raj AlGhul, the founder of the League of Assassins. Following the death of Dr. Dark, Raj gave Sensei control over the League of Assassins. Sensei rebelled against Raj and supposedly lost his sanity during this time. He is also responsible for creating Deadman, since he had ordered the murder of Boston Brand.
It was quite an act, really.
Number 68. Anthony Zuko. Anthony, or Tony Zuko, is a mobster who had murdered the parents of Dick Grayson, causing Bruce Wayne to adopt Grayson and nurture him into becoming Robin. Anthony Zuko was referred to as the boss, since he was a mafia don. He ran an extortion racket where he would send his men to extort money. Things went south when he tried to extort some money from Haley Circus, as the owner refused. Tony Zuko then sent his men to sabotage the circus, where Dick Grayson and his parents, Jonathan and Mary Grayson, worked as acrobats and trapeze artists. Zuko's men poured acid on the rope. The rope broke, and Jonathan and Mary Grayson fell to their deaths, while a horrified and young Dick Grayson could do nothing beyond witnessing the atrocity. In this way, Zuko created his own worst enemy, who would bring him down in the future. Number 69. Firebug. Originally known as Joe Rigger, Firebug started off as a soldier who was also a demolitions expert. He is not the only Firebug to exist, but he did kickstart it with his story. He had family in Gotham City, who were killed in 3 different accidents revolving around the buildings. With news of this traumatic incident, Rigger returns to Gotham, but his sanity had begun to slip. He vowed that those buildings would not kill again. With his military training, he assumed a new persona called the Firebug and equipped himself with a costume with napalm tanks. He then burnt those buildings to the ground. He was imprisoned at Blackgate Prison. Following his release, he tried to get into Black Mask's gang, but his rival arsonist Firefly defeated him. Following his close encounter with death from a separate incident where he almost died from his own inferno, he sold his Firebug costume to Harlan Combs, who became Firebug 2. Later, an unnamed person took on this alias after winning the costume and the name from an internet auction. He also teamed up with Mr. Freeze, which is ironical considering how Mr. Freeze really hates the heat. Number 70. Jane Doe. Jane Doe is a serial killer who is so cold that she kills her targets before assuming their identity. She makes her first appearance as a distinguished woman named Dr. Ann Carver, who is a psychiatrist in Arkham Asylum. Warren White bribes her to transfer him to a prison with minimum security while being oblivious to her original identity. Jane had studied the mannerisms of Dr. Ann Carver before killing her and also destroying all the paperwork, so she accepted White's request without much evidence to hold her back. Later, with orders from Dr. Jeremiah Arkham, who was aware of Jane's actions by the way, tries to kill White. The plan failed as he survived and she made herself a new enemy. Number 71. The Reaper. Several murderous Batman villains have used the alias of the Reaper or the Grim Reaper. The first Reaper in the Earth 1 continuity was Dr. Gruner. He was a German Jew who had experienced being put in a concentration camp by Colonel Kurt Schloss. During a Halloween parade, he killed Schloss, but ended up dead as he fell off a dam while battling Batman. In the New Earth continuity, Dr. Benjamin Gruner assumes this moniker. He is a Jewish German doctor and had the misfortune of watching his family die during the Holocaust. As a result, he turned into a Nazi hunter, scythe-weaving vigilante called the Reaper. He later affiliated himself with the Black Mask. The New Earth continuity sees Judson Caspian as the Reaper. He lost his beloved wife to a robber, which triggered him to becoming the Reaper. During the day, he wore the facade of being a regular socialite. In the Prime Earth continuity, his backstory is similar to the one in New Earth. But here, another layer of the character is explored as we learn that he was hated by Dr. Thomas Wayne. He is also the father of Rachel Caspian, a woman who had gotten engaged to Bruce Wayne. Number 72. The Fox. Warren Lawford was a member of the Terrible Trio. During this time, he took up Fox or Fisk as his alias, as he wore the fox head as a mask. Lawford was an inventor and an ambitious criminal. He banded up with two of his colleagues, Gunther Hardwick and Armand Lydecker, to form the Terrible Trio, which was a team of thieves. They dressed in business suits and the animals affiliated with their personalities or talents. As Lawford became the fox, Lydecker and Hardwick became the vulture and the shark, respectively. Together they committed crimes all over Gotham City. As you'd expect, Batman would be of great hindrance to them, causing Fox to relocate to Portsmouth City with Vulture and Shark. There they established the investment firm of Fisk, Shackley and Volper.
Victor, this isn't you. I won't let you destroy yourself anymore.
Number 73. Nora Fields. Nora Fields is popularly recognized as the wife of Victor Freeze, or Mr. Freeze. Her terminal illness and inevitable death is the situation that triggered Freeze into becoming Mr. Freeze. Nora Fields was diagnosed with a fatal illness not long after her marriage to Victor Freeze. As a person who worked in cryogenics, Freeze chose to preserve his wife and to prevent her from dying, hoping that a cure would be found in the future. In the New 52 continuity, Nora Fields is a woman born in 1943. She was only 23 when a rare heart condition plagued her. It was said to be terminal with her death by the time she turns 25. However, her family decided to preserve her cryogenically instead, hoping that someday a cure would be found for her condition. She was then stored in a facility owned by Wayne Enterprises. Victor Freeze fell in love with her while he was doing a PhD on her stasis. He began to believe that she was his wife and would spend most of his time with her. We really get to see her come to life once again in Rebirth. Having dedicated his life to cure his wife, Victor Freeze finally manages to bring Nora back and cure her of her terminal condition. Nora learns about her husband's life as a criminal and a villain. She chooses to embrace this lifestyle and takes up the name of Mrs. Freeze. But he did not wish her to be in crime. Nora considered it to be trouble for her and left him to become a criminal.
What's funny? You're saying we owe Batman's existence to you?
Number 74. Joe Chill. Joe Chill might not be a sinister, smart or strong villain, unlike most of the other villains in this list. However, his importance is insurmountable, as he is responsible for creating the Dark Knight. He was the one who murdered Dr. Thomas and Martha Wayne, which kick-started Bruce Wayne's story. In the Golden Age continuity, Joe Chill was first seen in Crime Alley. He desperately needed money, but he was not a cold-blooded murderer. When he held the Waynes at gunpoint, he was visibly flustered. After robbing them, he ended up killing them. During the Silver Age, Joe Chill works as a small-time crime boss. Batman learns of him being the perpetrator of his parents' murder while he was investigating Joe. Here, Batman also revealed his identity of Joe Chill. Number 75. Black Spider. Black Spider is a vigilante who is generally affiliated with the drug trade. Several people have worn the moniker of the Black Spider, who is a ruthless killer who has no problem with allowing innocents to die. And yet, he does not see himself as a villain. Eric Needham was the first Black Spider. He was a drug addict when he was young. He turned to crime to keep this expensive addiction afloat and would partake in several petty muggings and thefts until he attempted armed robbery. He broke into a liquor store and ended up killing a man accidentally. This man was his own father. Remorse took over him in waves, making him go insane almost. He kicked his drug addiction to the curb and decided to exact revenge upon drug dealers, as he considered them to be the reason why Needham fell into this cycle in the first place. Meanwhile, a mysterious force learnt of Needham's obsession with revenge and helped him acquire extensive training in high-end weapons. As Needham considered the drug-dealing criminals to be as lowly as flies, he began to call himself the Black Spider. What he did not know was that the mysterious force behind him was the city's top dog when it came to the drug business, Hannibal Hardwick. He intended to use Needham to eliminate his competition in the business. John LaMonica succeeded Needham. He was a professional hitman who took up this name when he was sent to kill Black Mask. However, he was sent to prison by Batman. Following his release, he took part in several criminal activities. In the end, he was shot several times by Detective Allen. Derek Coe became the third Black Spider, who was hired by the Calculator. His mission was to torture a Birds of Prey member called Savant.
And I know that the best way to ruin Ant-Man and all of the jerks on the Revengers movie is to wipe them out.
Number 76. Egghead. Calling yourself Egghead as a villain might not make you sinister, but is definitely unique. He also believed himself to be the smartest criminal in the world. He is also renowned for his catchphrases that made egg puns. So he would often use words like excellent and exactly. This criminal mastermind was in fact one of the smartest in the world. His excessive, or rather excessive intelligence made him super egoistic. To be fair, not much is known about his backstory. He was formerly associated with several villains, including the Riddler, who happens to be quite fond of him. Number 77. The Eraser. Lenny Fiasco embraced the alias of the Eraser as a criminal. He had a terrible college life where he was plagued by the continuous taunts of his classmates. As a criminal, he excelled in covering the tracks of crime left by other criminals. He would take a 20% cut of the money and erase all the evidence. During his time in college, he was classmates with Bruce Wayne. He would make several mistakes which would require him to constantly use an eraser. It made him an object of mockery. He also liked this girl called Celia Smith, and he planned to go to the school's ice carnival with her. But she chose to go with Bruce Wayne. This was the final nail to his coffin, and he assumed the identity of the Eraser as he turned to a life of crime. He was extremely competent at erasing the track of crime, leaving the police forces baffled over the lack of evidence in crime scenes.
Put me down, you psycho! It's time to show the world what I see when I look at Rome.
Number 78. Juella Dent. Juella Dent, or the Joker's daughter, is an enemy turned former member of Titan East and the Teen Titans. She has adopted several aliases throughout her life, such as Catgirl, Penguin's daughter, Joker's daughter, Scarecrow, Card Queen, and Harley Quinn. In the pre-crisis continuity, she claimed to be the daughter of Catwoman, the Penguin, the Riddler, and Scarecrow. Not only did this garner Robin's attention, but she also found out his identity. Later, she revealed herself to be the daughter of TwoFace, or Harvey Dent, Juella Dent. She joined the Teen Titans to atone for Harvey Dent's crimes as TwoFace and went by the name Harley Quinn. In the post-crisis continuity, Juella Dent was a delusional and schizophrenic person who had visited the mental institutions several times. She was also an acrobat who uses clown motif gadgets. However, it was revealed that she was the daughter of Earth 3's the Jokester and Threeface, or Evelyn Dent. The entire thing can get a bit confusing. In the new 52 continuity, her character was revamped completely, and she was made to be a lot more villainous, which is why she attains a spot in this list. She was born to a happy couple who lived in the suburbs of Gotham City. However, her father had always been uneasy around her. As she grew up, she became more and more strange. She would commit unkind acts such as trapping a spider in a light bulb and creating a corset with barbed wire. She would also use a box cutter to cut her face, as she believed that hideous things were beautiful. Her parents took her to a hospital for a surgery, which left half of her face deformed. Juella reveled in her new form, calling it flawless, while her parents found it ghastly. That night, she found out that her parents did not want her in the house, as they argued over it, and she ran away. Juella joined a tribe of people who dwelled in the sewers of Gotham City. When she found the Joker's face, she thought it was her own reflection. She donned the face and was mistaken to be the Joker. She later sought out the Dollmaker to get the Joker's face grafted onto hers. Number 79. David Kane. David Kane is one of the best assassins in the world, and he is the man responsible for training Bruce Wayne. His assassination victims have often been some of DC's most powerful or famous people. He is dangerous and lethal. David Kane is a member of the League of Assassins. During his time in the League, he intended to train an apprentice to succeed him. He would train children to be deadly assassins. It mostly did not work out, so he decided he needed a child of his own so that they could inherit David's natural talent and ruthlessness. He sought out Sandra Wu-san, a woman with exceptional fighting skills. However, he believed Sandra's sister to be her weakness and killed her to help unleash Sandra's true abilities. Mortified by her sister's untimely death, Sandra trained and sought Kane out to extract her revenge upon him. She lost to him, but realized that she can be a better fighter. Kane agreed to train her under a condition. She would bear him a child and then allow Kane to train her. This gave rise to Cassandra Cain. Number 80, the Cavalier. Peste disarmed. The most accurate description of this character comes from the animated series Batman, the Brave and the Bold, where the caped crusader quips that somewhere Shakespeare is spinning in his grave. The Cavalier is one of the oldest Batman antagonists, debuting in 1943's Detective Comics number 81. It wasn't until issue 89 came out that we discover his identity. Mortimer Drake was an obscenely wealthy man with exotic and idiosyncratic tastes. He would often be found associating with elite social circles, mingling with Gotham's richest and most powerful people, including Bruce Wayne. Very soon, as it were, his exuberance left him penniless beyond his expensive suits, and he decided to turn to a life of crime to fulfill his wishes. Channeling his inner musketeer, he took on the costumed identity of the Cavalier, a swashbuckling swordsman turned supervillain with a code of chivalry. He first encountered the dynamic duo after stealing a baseball from a young child, and managed to get away from them every time, until Bruce finally deduced his identity. Though he possessed no superpowers, the Cavalier was a great athlete and a top-tier swordsman and hand-to-hand combatant. He carried an electrical rapier that shocked his targets on contact and had a plume attached to his hat that was actually a steel-tipped dart. The Cavalier has crossed swords with the Caped Crusader multiple times, even getting the best of him on certain occasions. Though, like every other Batman villain, he eventually ends up in Arkham, where he's broken in by Bane during the Nightfall event, and later infected with the venom and fear toxins during the Night Terrors storyline. Number 81. Dr. XX. Sheldon Moldoff and Dave Wood once tried to give us the closest possible thing to a scientific explanation of the human soul. And, ironically enough, it's the soul that takes on the role of Mr. Hyde in their version. Debuting in Detective Comics number 261, Dr. Simon X was an extraordinary scientist who discovered that if a person was exposed to a powerful enough energy source, their aura would be charged up and given a form that exists outside of their physical bodies. He decided to test this hypothesis on himself and was successful in creating an energy duplicate that looked like a mirror image of him. Unfortunately, that's where the similarities ended. Being an introvert with a fragile self-concept, Simon X had always teetered on the edge of sanity. His experiment caused all his emotional and mental turmoil to manifest itself in the form of his energy duplicate, which he dubbed XX, in an effort to distinguish between the two. Sadly, all his efforts would be in vain, as the malevolent XX would overpower the good doctor's will on several occasions and commit various crimes as the ethereal menace Dr. XX. Dr. XX shares Simon X's consciousness, but can also act alone, which made him particularly tricky for the Caped Crusader to nab. Additionally, his powers of flight, electrical energy blasts, and super strength have pushed Batman to his breaking point, forcing him to call in backup. Bruce even had to go so far as to build his own duplicator machine and create Double Batman to take him down in Detective Comics number 316. Number 82. The Shark. The man who fired the opening shot in Batman's tangle with the terrible trio eventually tries to murder the very people he was once partners with. Like Warren Lawford, Gunther Hardwick was an exceptional scientist and inventor, as well as someone who specialized in aquatic and underwater devices, especially submarines. And just like Lawford, Hardwick had tasted every earthly pleasure he could find. So it didn't take a lot of convincing for him to join the terrible trio as its marine expert. Hardwick was actually the first component of the trio's modus operandi, in that he was the first one to commit a crime out of the three by stealing a fortune from a millionaire's cargo ship. Unfortunately, Batman uncovered this pattern and was able to put an end to the trio's schemes and send them packing to Portsmouth. Here, Hardwick adopted the alias Sherman Shackley and continued working with the trio, until one day his mind finally snapped under the pressure of all the drugs he was abusing, and he decided to kill his former partners. In Detective Comics number 832, Shackley is presumed dead by Fox and Vulture, who find his teeth next to a heavily disfigured corpse. In reality, it is revealed that Shackley has experienced a severe psychotic breakdown, driving him to kill his former partners in an attempt to reinvent himself. To that end, he ripped out his own teeth to fake his death and fitted his jawline with the teeth of an actual shark, chasing Fox and Vulture all the way to Arkham. After witnessing their old friend trying to rip their limbs apart with nothing but his teeth, Fox and Vulture wasted no time in aligning themselves with Warren White, who showed Shackley that Gotham's underworld can only handle one great shark at a time.
Time to fly.
Number 83. The Vulture. The final member of the terrible trio has a much closer relationship to the Caped Crusader, in that, technically, is the correct one. The original Vulture was a man called Armand Lydecker, an aeronautics expert who was so ridiculously wealthy that he made Ferris Air look like an incubation project. Having exhausted every possible method of stimulating excitement in his life, he becomes a part of the terrible trio and serves as its aerial extension. His genius-level intellect allows him to create weapons, gadgets, and all kinds of aerodynamic devices, which he uses to rob a cargo plane midair in his first appearance. Unfortunately, the sheer visibility of his area of expertise comes back to bite him in the arse, and also leads to the downfall of the terrible trio, as it was his crime that allowed Batman to crack the code to their criminal formula and apprehend them. After shifting their operations to Portsmouth, Lydecker would take on the alias Volper and would be heavily involved in the production of the A39 steroid. After Shackley tries to kill both of them, Fisk and Volper effectively disband the terrible trio, which is later revived by Talia Al Ghul. Under her, the group's lineup consists of two good-for-nothing miscreants, filling in as Fox and Shark, and the latest person to take on the mantle of Gotham's persecutor in DC's Infinite Frontier reboot, Timothy Jace Fox, the son of longtime Batman ally Lucius Fox. Operating as this incarnation's Vulture, Jace's crew decides to rob Bruce Wayne's mansion, but is defeated by Batman with relative ease. This experience has a profound impact on the rambunctious Jace, which translates into his journey as a superhero.
Mrs. Clayface!
Hawk Girl!
What are you doing here?
What do you think?
Number 84, Lady Clayface. The fourth iteration of the character and the only female so far, Sondra Fuller debuted in The Outsiders in comic number 21 as an agent of the nefarious international terrorist Cobra. Having been thwarted time and again by the dynamic duo, Cobra decided to put together a team of elite operatives who would possess the powers of every villain that Batman had faced in his years as a crime-fighting vigilante. Fuller was a member of this team called Strike Force Cobra and was injected with the DNA of Matt Hagen, aka Clayface II, to recreate the effects that the protoplasm had on his body. The procedure was a success, and Sondra's power far exceeded those of her predecessors. Unlike Matt Hagen or Preston Payne before her, she had full control over her shape-shifting abilities and didn't need to replenish her powers. Additionally, she could also copy the powers and abilities of any superhero she mimicked, making her that much harder to beat. The only problem was she couldn't turn it off, which meant her powers were both a blessing and a curse. It was Lady Clayface who created the Mud Pack, a group of 4 Clayfaces who targeted Batman as a receptacle of their individual vendettas. She inadvertently gave Basil Carlo Clayface powers when he injected her and Preston's DNA into his own bloodstream, becoming the ultimate Clayface. During this encounter, she fights alongside the Bat family and takes Carlo down, eventually falling in love with Preston, marrying him, and giving birth to the only pure Clayface in DC, their son Cassius, aka Claything. Number 85, Composite Superman. Imagine the powers of the entire legion of superheroes condensed into one person. Now imagine that person developed a searing hatred for Superman, Batman and Robin, and used his newfound superpowers to try to embarrass them all. The person you're thinking of is Joe Meach, aka the Composite Superman, who debuted in World's Finest Comics number 142. Joe Meach used to be a world-famous diver who had now fallen on bad times. He had an idea to regain his lost fame and decided that his piece de resistance as a diver would be to jump from a tall building into a tiny bucket. Unfortunately, the tank he was aiming for had already sprung a leak, and maybe an inch of water was left in it, and so he would be jumping to his death. As he was falling, Superman came and saved Joe, which angered the man as he thought that the Man of Steel had stolen his moment of redemption and made a fool out of him. To make things worse, Superman got Meach a job at the Superman Museum, where he was tormented by the statues of the very person he now directed all his hatred towards. One day, when he was in the hall of the LSH, he got struck by lightning and ended up gaining all of their superpowers as a result. Imbued with all the abilities of the 30th century's finest super teens, he morphed his body into a half Superman, half Batman construct and began calling himself the Composite Superman. He teamed up with the two in an attempt to embarrass them and usurp their positions as the world's finest superhero. He'd have gotten away with it too if Batman hadn't figured out his deception in time. As the Composite Superman, Meach had godlike powers and completely embarrassed Kal-El in their first encounter. While this persona would become dormant later, it would resurface when the alien Zan attacks a reformed Meach with lightning and causes the Composite Superman to awaken. This time, though, Meach turns over a new leaf and sacrifices himself, trying to save the very heroes he once wanted to kill.
A kite for my fiendish revenge. I'll be the most famous kite-related person in history.
Number 86, Kite Man. Out of the cavalcade of bizarre oddities that exist in the rogues gallery of DC superheroes, perhaps none is as brave or stupid as Kite Man, a fact that was ridiculed to the point of becoming stale during the War of Jokes and Riddles storyline. After all, who can take a character that flies around on a jumbo hang glider, uses kite-themed paraphernalia, and shouts out "Hell yeah" for no apparent reason, without any ounce of seriousness? Debuting in Batman number 133 and created by Bill Finger and Dick Sprang, nothing was explained about Charles Chuck Brown's infatuation with kites for several decades, aside from the fact that he was already into them as a child. In fact, even his name wasn't revealed until 1986's Hawkman, Volume 2, Number 4 was published, a full 26 years after Kite Man's first appearance. All that was known about him was the fact that he was a joke in both the superhero and the supervillain communities. 2016's Rebirth event rebooted the entire DCU and finally gave us an answer as to why Kite Man does what he does. And it was more tragic than we could have expected. In Batman Volume 3, Number 27, it was revealed that Chuck was a former aerodynamic engineer who was responsible for creating the Joker Mobile. Chuck had a son who thought his dad's obsession with kites was cool, and once he even exclaimed "Hell yeah" at the sight of his father with a kite. When the Riddler killed his son by poisoning his kite string, Chuck decided to create a customized glider, and adopting his son's words as his villainous catchphrase, he became the Kite Man. He joined the Joker's side during the war and was essentially comic relief throughout the arc. Eventually, he sided with the Caped Crusader. Number 87. Fright. Linda Freitauer was born with an affliction. Suffering from an advanced form of albinism, she was forced to spend her days hibernating, as even the slightest exposure to sunlight could prove fatal for her. Forced to spend most of her time isolated from regular society, she became obsessed with fixing her condition and enrolled herself in medical school. She managed to become extremely skilled in the fields of genetics and chemistry, but was pushed too far in her pursuit of a cure and was expelled for conducting illegal experiments on human beings. Broke and living in destitution, she was given a chance to complete her work by Oswald Cobblepot, aka the Penguin. That's how she debuts in Batman number 627, working as the enamored assistant of Jonathan Crane, who has been commissioned to produce more fear toxin by the Penguin. But if you're thinking that working with Scarecrow wasn't going to be safe for Linda, think again, because somehow she's even more demented than the King of Dementia. During their time researching together, she manages to transform Kane into a fear toxin exhaling monster called the Scarebeast without his knowledge or consent, and proceeds to use the beast to pick off the internal threats in the Penguin's organization. By the time Batman figures out what's happening and confronts Penguin, Linda has used Crane's research to develop a cure for herself that removes the negative effects of her albinism while amplifying her natural strength, senses and agility, and giving her the same ability to exhale fear toxin like the Scarebeast. Now calling herself Fright, she escapes the dynamic duo and goes to work for the new Black Mask, becoming a key player in his criminal empire. Number 88. Nobody. Batman's journey to becoming the world's greatest detective demanded that he trained under some of the best martial artists and detectives of the world, one of whom was Henry Ducas, a French assassin. Bruce learnt a lot from working with Ducas and had a mostly amicable relationship with him, but they disagreed on one major point. Batman was strictly against taking lives, and Ducas had little regard for life itself. Though they went their separate ways, this ideological difference would come back to haunt Bruce in the very first issue of New 52's Batman and Robin series. See, when Bruce was training with Ducas, Henri's son Morgan became his fighting partner. Having been trained by Ducas himself for 14 years, Morgan was an exceptional killer in his own right, but somehow kept losing to the novice Bruce Wayne, who kept pushing him to his breaking point. He finally snapped when Bruce beat him within an inch of his life after his own father had ordered him to kill his former partner. Broken in body and mind, Morgan developed a burning hatred for Batman and his preposterous no-killing rule, viewing him as more of a casual force in the fight against crime. He adopted the mantle of Nobody and embarked on a mission to end the legend of the Batman. While Morgan wasn't as skilled as Bruce, he was much more lethal in combat, thanks to his suit, which is equipped with sonic and cloaking abilities. He also knows a deadly nerve strike that can paralyze a person with one hit, which he used to kill off Batman Incorporated's Russian operative Ravil in his debut appearance. He would go on to toy with Damian Wayne's ingrained killing impulse and manipulate him into joining his own crusade against crime during the Born to Kill storyline. Morgan also succeeded in turning the boy to his cause, but was stopped by Bruce just in time. Number 89. Professor Milo. It's a shame we don't see more of this character anymore, because Professor Milo's debut appearance was perfect. Created by Bill Finger and Sheldon Moldoff, Achilles Milo first appeared in Detective Comics number 247. He was a brilliant scientist who was an expert in chemistry and alchemy, but like most scientists in a comic book, he decided to use his gifts to pursue a criminal life. He used his extensive knowledge of the human anatomy and its biochemical nature to create several drugs and gases designed to incapacitate or downright antagonize certain aspects of a person's personality or character traits. In his first encounter with Batman, Professor Milo drugged him with a compound that gave Bruce cherotophobia and forced him to swap out his batsuit for the ridiculously flashy Starman outfit. It was only after several hours of forced desensitization that he was able to get over his newly acquired fear, and even that wouldn't have been possible without Robin. On one occasion, Professor Milo gassed Batman with a compound that made him lose his will to live, which is a pretty hard thing to accomplish if you know anything about the Dark Knight. In fact, to ensure that he's never pushed to the brink of mental collapse again, Bruce created the violent backup personality of the Batman of Zur-En-Ar, in case he ever falls victim to psychological tricks as effective as Professor Milo's. He was also responsible for Anthony Lupus's wolfish tendencies and has even consulted the Batman in a couple of cases from his cell in Arkham Asylum, after trying, and failing, to turn him into a lunatic with his trademark gases, of course. Number 90. Onomatopoeia. Nothing is known about the origins of onomatopoeia. He could be a regular member of society, married with 2 children, none of whom are aware of his secret identity. It is possible that he is from Delaware and had a brother who was killed by a masked criminal. He had a nickname once, which he revealed to Virago, but we are not sure if even that is true because he did so shortly after killing her. Onomatopoeia debuted in Green Arrow Volume 3, number 12, as a serial killer who practically targets superheroes without superpowers and speaks only in onomatopoeias. Kinda anticlimactic that the bad guy supposed to mess up with their entire life can only do so whilst uttering noises like twip or skint. Wait, that used to be the other company. Either way, don't let his borderline comical supervillain identity fool you into thinking he's just a goofball. The ambiguity is what makes him so dangerous, because how are you supposed to fight something you can't even begin to understand? He's an expert marksman and hand-to-hand combatant, skilled with sniper rifles and fists alike. He is also insanely durable for a non-super, and he has been able to rush through 6 arrows shot at him with pinpoint accuracy, as well as survived multiple explosions and fires that would have otherwise killed a normal person. Onomatopoeia has instigated gang wars in Gotham City and was even able to gain access to Batclave thanks to his complete mastery of disguises. Posing as the vigilante Baphomet, Onomatopoeia briefly worked with Robin to gain Batman's trust and only revealed himself once he was in the cave and had already slit Silver St. Cloud's throat in cold blood. Bruce didn't even know anything was wrong until he heard that familiar clack-clack sound, and it wasn't coming from his utility belt. Number 91. The Mad Monk. Despite his relative irrelevancy in recent years, decades, the Mad Monk holds the distinction of being the second supervillain that Batman faced since his inception, and the first to headline a multi-part storyline. Created by Gardner Fox and Bob Kane, he debuted in Detective Comics number 31 all the way back in 1939. Operating out of a castle in Hungary, the monk was a vampire who was putting together an army of werewolf women to take over the world, alongside his trusted assistant, Darla. Using his hypnotic powers, the monk managed to trap Bruce Wayne's fiancée, Julie Madison, in a trance-like state and brought her to Hungary to make her a part of his army. He was eventually defeated by the Caped Crusader and struck by lightning, presumed dead. His character was revived by Jerry Conway during the Silver Age of comics, where he was reimagined as an ex-plantation owner called Louis Dubois, who lived in New Orleans with his sister Dela after the American Civil War. Set upon by the vengeful spirits of their former slaves, the siblings gained vampire-like powers after being subjected to a voodoo ritual that had to be exorcised by Father Green in order to be contained. However, our favorite version has to be the post-crisis one, introduced in the 6-issue miniseries created by Matt Wagner, called Nicholas Tepesh, a not-too-subtle reference to Vlad the Impaler. The Mad Monk was the leader of a vampire cult called the Brotherhood, which operated on the outskirts of Gotham City. The miniseries was a reimagining of the first storyline featuring the monk's character and managed to make him come off as more unhinged than ever before by throwing in a dash of fanaticism as befits his character. Number 92. Magpie. Growing up, Margaret Pye had always loved shiny things and wanted them all for herself. She was ridiculed for her fixation and nicknamed Magpie, after the bird that collects shiny things as a stimulant for potential mates. This obsession of hers just got stronger as she grew up, and she took a job as a curator of the Gotham City Museum of Antiques to be surrounded by the valuables she loved. But there is a fine line between loving something and obsessing over it, and she was eventually overcome with compulsive jealousy when she realized she would never possess the antiques that surrounded her. This juxtaposition of her desires and her duties made her mind snap, and she decided to fully embrace the identity bestowed upon her by her bullies. Debuting in Batman number 401, the villainous Magpie decided to take matters into her own hands and started stealing precious valuables and exhibits from museums, replacing them with booby-trapped versions that would be lethal to the untrained eye. She had an extensive knowledge of poisons, explosives, and most such devices of fatality. She was also notable for being the first villain that Batman and Superman take down as a team in the post-crisis continuity, as established in Man of Steel number 3. Number 93, Crazy Quilt. Created by the legendary Jack Kirby during his brief stint at DC, Crazy Quilt was an exceptionally talented painter who led a double life as a criminal mastermind using paintings to leave clues. He was living a comfortable life as a wealthy art thief until he was double-crossed by one of his own henchmen, tearing down his modest empire. To make matters worse, in the ensuing struggle between the authorities and his gang, a gunshot wound severely damaged his eyesight, effectively blinding him. He volunteered for an experimental procedure to restore his lost vision by fusing an unique helmet directly to his optic nerves. While the operation itself was a success, Quilt was left with a unique form of colorblindness. Though his sight was restored, he could only see the world in bright, vivid colors.
You pilfered your last painting, Crazy Quilt.
This constant sensory overload drove him berserk, and he assumed the costumed identity of the supervillain we know as Crazy Quilt. Though he doesn't have any innate superpowers, his helmet and visor more than compensates for that fact. Crazy Quilt's helmet allows him to hypnotize his victims using flashing lights of various colors, and can also project lethal laser beams as well as blinding getaway lights to facilitate an easy escape. The visor functions as Quilt's artificial eyes, since his own eyes no longer function. The lenses feed their input signal straight into his brain, and he can see things even if the visor is placed on the back of his head. After being defeated repeatedly by the Boy Commandos, he relocates to Gotham City and develops an impassioned hatred for the Boy Wonder, nearly killing Jason Todd a day into his tenure as the new Robin, thinking that it was Dick Grayson under the mask. He continues to harangue the Bat family till this day with his avant-garde costume and his crazy, powerful helmet. Number 94, The Crime Doctor. We honestly wouldn't be surprised if George R.R. Martin based Lord Qyburn off this maniacal medical practitioner. Created by arguably the best creative duo in DC history, Bob Kane and Bill Finger, Matthew Thorne, Bradford in the Earth 1 continuity, debuted in Detective Comics number 77. The brother of Gotham City mob boss extraordinaire Rupert Thorne, he used to lead a straight life but couldn't resist the allure of the family business. Matthew was a brilliant surgeon and loved his profession deeply, but crime was like an addictive drug that he couldn't shake off. It didn't take him long to follow in his brother's footsteps, and soon enough Matthew Thorne began treating the criminals of Gotham City from his private practice as the Crime Doctor. Besides treating his patients, he would also hand out prescriptions that taught them how to execute their crimes with greater efficiency for 25% of the action. If he was required to conduct a house call and bail someone out of a bad situation, he'd take 50%, no questions asked. Thanks to his active felicitation of crime in Gotham City, it wasn't long before the dynamic duo came looking for him. Though he had no superpowers, Matthew Thorne's greatest strength is his demented mind. He is an expert surgeon and criminal mastermind who is so good at extracting information from his targets that he is the resident torturer of the secret society. Thorne was an average hand-to-hand combatant, but his injector gun gave him the clear edge in a fight, as it could either kill or incapacitate his enemies by emitting a lethal vapor-like gas. Like his brother, he prefers controlling things from the shadows and is single-handedly responsible for Gotham's criminals feeling healthier, stronger, and more invigorated than ever. And while that's what a good doctor should do, something tells us it isn't because Thorne worships the Hippocratic Oath.
Is trying to connect to Rupert Thorne.
Hey, nice tie, boss.
Number 95, Rupert Thorne. And speaking of the Thorns, let's look at Matthew's brother, shall we? Before the Penguin or the Black Mask ever rose to power, like they have in recent years, Gotham City's underworld was controlled by one man, and his name was Rupert Thorne. Created by Steve Englehart and Walter Simonson, Rupert debuted in Detective Comics number 469 and was introduced as the guy in Gotham's crime scene. A corrupt politician operating in the most corrupt city in America, Rupert accumulated an obscene amount of wealth and political connections during his lifetime, using them to finance his criminal enterprise and run it from the shadows. He eventually became a city councilman and invested in diverse businesses to expand his influence on the legitimate side of the board. Rupert was also the leader of Gotham's exclusive tobacconists club, which is how he came onto Batman's radar. After undergoing a harrowing physical transformation, fellow club member Dr. Phosphorus warned Thorne about the Caped Crusader and the dangers he posed to his massive empire. Seeing the truth in his words, Thorne used his political connections to decry Batman as a vigilante and did everything in his power to take him down. He replaced James Gordon with his own lackey and got Hamilton Hill elected mayor, who immediately put on a citywide arrest call for the Caped Crusader. He even went as far as hiring Deadshot to take out Bruce Wayne after learning Batman's identity from a tortured Hugo Strange. It's just a shame that he went after Strange, as that decision would cost him his life. Still, for a while, Rupert Thorne was the worst thing going for Gotham's Dark Knight, and that includes the Joker.
I pick things out of my...
Number 96, Gorilla Boss. DC's frenzied approach to capitalizing on the gorilla craze in the 50s resulted in the creation of one of the most brutal and bizarre Batman villains of the Golden Age, the Gorilla Boss of Gotham City. George Dyke was once a top mobster who controlled much of the crime that took place in Gotham City. Unfortunately, he did so under the Batman's watchful eye and was promptly put behind bars by the Caped Crusader for his various felonies. Sentenced to death by cyanide-laced gassing, the boss came up with a plan to take his revenge on Batman. With the help of a crooked scientist, Dyke was able to safely transfer his mind to the body of a gorilla and cheat his sentence. Now inhabiting the body of one of the most powerful primates in history, he takes on the moniker of the Gorilla Boss and plans to transfer his mind to Batman's body while trapping his consciousness within the apes, thus gaining the ultimate revenge. Though he can only communicate with his henchmen by using pen and paper, Dyke's primate body is far stronger than that of any human and grants him enhanced strength, endurance, and a range of motion. He chases Gotham's protector all throughout the city, pummeling him every chance he gets, but ultimately his newfound body proves to be his undoing. He pursues him up a building, but falls unconscious and is promptly arrested by the authorities for his crimes after Batman deduces his real identity. Though his appearances have been sporadic since, he is one of the better gorilla-based villains that DC has created. They have made a head-spinning 50 of them. Number 97, Ragdoll 2. The original Ragdoll was a Golden Age Flash villain who was blessed with the queer power of being triple-jointed. He could contort his limbs to inhuman degrees, quite like a ragdoll, and decided to use his powers to commit crime and take on the Flash. But while Ragdoll 1's membership into every secret group of supervillains would be contingent on his unique physiology, his son would have to put himself through literal hell to get to that level. And even then, he's mostly treated like comic relief. Debuting in Villains United #1, Ragdoll II's real name is Peter Merkel Jr. Being born to the contortionist extraordinaire that was his father, young Peter was expected to follow in his footsteps. But genetics failed the boy, as he was born without the triple-jointedness that made his father such a great thief. He faced great abuse as a child because of this, being shunned and mistreated by both his father and brother. Determined to live up to the family legacy, Peter Merkel Jr. subjected his body to hundreds of surgeries over the course of 12 years in an effort to replicate his father's powers. While it gave him the flexibility he so desired, it also completely shattered any vestiges of sanity left within him. His surgeries replaced his joints with self-lubricating and fully rotating implants, which gave him contorting capabilities that far exceeded his father's. Additionally, his body also became nearly indestructible thanks to the modifications it went through. Donning a costume that closely resembled his father's, he joined Gail Simone and Dale Eaglesham's reimagined Secret Six, and later went on to side with the Joker in his DC-wide supervillain war. Unlike his predecessor, whose cruelty is measured as opposed to impulsive, Ragdoll 2 is insanity in a unitard and will shove you off a bridge if you dare question him. Just ask the Mad Hatter.
Detectable by spy satellite.
Tell me what you know.
Number 98, Dr. Moon. Healing is the body's natural process and is therefore dull and commonplace. I am an experimenter, a pioneer, a misunderstood visionary. Quote unquote. It pretty much sums up the life motto of this insane former medical practitioner. Appearing first in Batman number 240, Dr. Moon was introduced as the go-to healer, medical experimenter, and torturer of the League of Assassins. Nothing is known about his past life, save the fact that he was once nominated for a Nobel Prize, and that there is no real way to verify his doctorate's authenticity, as there are no records of his accreditation. What is known, however, is that he is a brilliant surgeon who, if his moral compass was correctly aligned, could have saved thousands of lives with his talent. Sadly, because of his aforementioned views on the process of healing, he ended up dedicating his life to crime and became the sadistic Dr. Moon. In his debut appearance, he trapped Dr. Mason Sterling's brain in a jar and hooked it up to a computer in Raj AlGhul's latest attempt at achieving immortality. He was also responsible for Catwoman's return to villainy after she had become a reformed vigilante, brainwashing her as part of his and Joker's latest scheme to inflict as much pain as possible onto the Batman. Though he hasn't popped up since being stabbed in the neck by Manhunter, Dr. Moon's actions will always remind Bruce of one of his greatest failures in life. Number 99, the Tallyman. Everyone's gotta pay the Tallyman. We don't know anything about this mob enforcer's personal details, but we do know that that phrase has defined his entire outlook on life. Starving and living in rags, the boy who would become the Tallyman lived in constant fear of the criminals who threatened his family for the money his father had borrowed from them years before. After his father died, those same criminals extorted his weekly fee from his mother, and when she couldn't repay them, she was left a broken mess. Her terrified son asked her why she didn't just refuse to pay, when she uttered the words, "Everybody has to pay the Tallyman." That would become his life's motto. The next time that the enforcer came around, the boy couldn't contain his rage and brutally murdered the older man. He was 12 years old. Getting heavily abused in prison and returning home to a dead mother and sister shattered his mind, and he turned into the Tallyman, a hitman for the mob whose debt collection fees was paid in human lives. He was hired by Gotham's underworld to take care of any debtors who interfered with their business interests, which inadvertently led him to Batman. His expert marksmanship and clinical insanity weren't enough to get the job done, though he had fled the scene vowing revenge. He resurfaced during No Man's Land, serving as Two-Face's personal executioner. Tallyman 2 would emerge post-Infinite Crisis as the personal hitman of Warren White, and was responsible for throwing Batman readers into disarray by murdering most of his rogues gallery with weapons belonging to other villains, most notably killing the ventriloquist with Two-Face's gun. No matter which incarnation it is, the Tallyman always gets the job done, except when he's confronted by Gotham's protector, of course. And number 100, the Tweed Brothers. The Mad Hatter wasn't the only Batman villain to emulate Lewis Carroll's works, but where his actions were motivated by his delusion, the Tweed Brothers were inherently nefarious. Debuting in Detective Comics number 74, Dumfries Tweed and Diva Tweed are cousins who resemble each other so closely that they are often mistaken for identical twins. Both boys also bear a striking similarity to Sir John Tenniel's depictions of Tweedledum and Tweedledee, hence the nicknames. Being overweight and extremely lethargic, the Tweed brothers preferred to mastermind criminal activities from behind the scenes, as opposed to being out there in the field, getting their hands dirty. Additionally, they also use their borderline identical appearances to their advantage, tricking people into thinking that they are both effectively the same person. In fact, they look so much alike that even Batman was fooled by them on his first encounters with the duo. It took the world's greatest detective a good while to crack the code to their twin magic, after which they became regular denizens of Arkham Asylum. The Tweed brothers have since developed a close relationship with the Mad Hatter, with the New 52 introducing them as his henchmen. They were even in charge of the Wonderland gang which terrorized the streets of Gotham City in Detective Comics number 841. What do you think of this list? Did you enjoy this video? If yes, then don't forget to like and comment down below. Till then, goodbye and have a nice one.
Why so serious? He comes at me with the knife.